man, are you tired? Coffee's just not doing it for you these days. Let's talk about something different. Let's talk about cacao. Cacao comes from the theobroma plant. Broma means food, and theo means, well, God. So why aren't more of us talking about this godlike food source? Packed with antioxidants, polyphenols, theobromine, which is like caffeine but without the jitters, healthy fat, low carbs, protein, magnesium, calcium, and the highest plant source concentration of iron known to man. Why aren't we consuming this stuff every day? Well, you can. Our partners at Cora Cacao offer ceremonial grade cacao, sustainably sourced, plant to paste from fair trade farms in the Mayan motherland of Guatemala. Cora Cacao is committed to delivering cacao products to you at reasonable prices in a way that makes the world a better place for all involved. Whether you're making morning cocoa lattes, iced cacao, hosting a meditation ceremony, or just doing alchemy in your mom's basement, Cora Cacao is committed to supplying you with the highest grade stuff for what you, your body, and your mind need. So head on over to coracacao.com. That's coracacao.com. Use promo code INTHEKEEP, one word, all caps, at checkout for 10% off your order. It's time to replace those bad habits with good ones, and using Cora Cacao for your energy and nutrient needs is a great place to start. I'm proud to call Cora Cacao a partner of In the Keep, and I hope that you will be proud to call them a new part of your daily routine. Much love.
Yeah, so we met through Tim Kelly. He just forwarded me your email. Honestly, for all I know, you guys could be the same person because I've never seen you in the same place at the same time. But tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Gorrelli. I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. Originally, growing up, I was a mute child. My mom originally, she thought that I had issues with my hearing.
Right.
And the doctors had a ton of different specialists look at me, and they just said, he's choosing not to talk.
Did you have autism?
I was later diagnosed with autism. And now I guess my opinion has changed so much. What is autism?
Right.
Again, I guess the dynamics of autism have changed so much because of the research. But yeah, later on, it was pretty clear that I was on the spectrum. I didn't have a lot of, again, it wasn't the fact that I couldn't talk. It was the fact that I had no desire to communicate.
No, this is really well documented, the phenomena of non-speaking autistic people who actually are no, it's just too much effort to talk.
Oh, absolutely. And Tyler, I was so fascinated with puzzles and with mathematics, and more specifically, mathematical probability. I started studying sports statistics out of the box I would get into the newspapers, and I was fascinated. And with autism, you go into these, I guess, special interests where you really start forming outside of those special interests. I didn't have any interest in anything besides numbers and puzzles, patterns.
Sure. That's what your brain worked that way. It gravitated towards what it liked. And then what's interesting though is, and I swear to God, I was just listening to something yesterday about this, how many people who are non-speaking autistic, for a long time, still, around 20 or so, gain all of their other functions and go to university and do are just as successful as anyone else. Usually overly successful, like specialist in whatever they're going to do, mathematics, engineering, science, physics. This kind of stuff is like kind of that. A lot of the people that end up in those chairs come from that background, and yet most people regard a non-speaking autistic person as stupid, and
Yeah.
as like not all there in the head as someone who's not capable of cognition. And a lot of this podcast, I know it's like really controversial, but the telepathy tapes have talked so much about this, where I don't know necessarily how much I believe in the literal telepathy between, like, the kids and the mom with they're supposed to be using this spelling technique that they have without, giving the answers to the kids. And I've heard both sides of that argument. But regardless, just the fact that there are all these people out there that people regard as not intelligent, who are just out there saying like, no, 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 just presume from the jump that we're competent, and then let us kind of like decide at our own pace what we want to learn and how we want to take it in. And then they usually turn out fine, later in life.
Absolutely. And you know what? There was a lot of darkness and pain that grew with I was specifically tone deaf. So when I would talk, I didn't understand tonality. And so I didn't have a lot of body language that was, I guess, reciprocal with what I was trying to say. So people were confused, and again, when most of the conversations you would engage in, I just did not find them interesting.
Sure.
And so I would disengage. And there was a lot of pain to be labeled, because when I would speak about stuff that I was not interested in, of course you don't look like you are very intelligent. I've heard it said to communicate is to express who we are to the world.
Right.
So if we can't express who we are to the world, there is a lot of pain and suffering that goes there. And I started, now that I've got a little older and I can look back at the some of the early situations in my life, I could see where I would almost leave my body. I would separate from reality, and I would go into this daydream world. And in daydream world, I could think about anything. I could really get into, populations of cities, because I was, for some reason, obsessed. Again, I think that mathematics is a language, and to most of it's been lost. They talk about that math is the language of the universe.
Yeah.
That mythology is the language of our ancestors, and that the logos is the language of us. That we express ourselves through frequency and vibration, through symbols, and through logos. And anyways,
stories mostly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Tyler, I kind of explained a little bit just to jump forward. When I was 18, I was a big time wrestler too. So I excelled at wrestling.
Oh yeah.
I love to wrestle. I'm from Wichita, Kansas. So, wrestling, I actually I got an injury, and I got prescribed, originally it was a hydrocodone, and I didn't know anything. Of course, most of us, it was 2005. This was kind of, at least in my world, the beginning of the opioid epidemic. But I can specifically remember, Tyler, that when I ingested the opioid, I could abstractly communicate everything that I always wanted to say. I could do it in sequential order, and I could do it in a way that I had never been able to do that before. And I learned that I could start to even begin acting like other people. And so I started, it started with like John F. Kennedy and, Martin Luther King and Gandhi and all these people that I would emulate because I would read about them. And over time, especially with the help of drugs and alcohol, most of the autistic-like traits were gone.
Sure.
But that took me into a hell realm that is very, very, very difficult to describe. And one that a fellow scientist that I really enjoyed, Sigmund Freud, had begun doing experiments on addiction and essentially got himself trapped in this hell realm as well and couldn't find his way out. And I don't know if he ever truly did.
Yeah, reading some of Freud's letters when he was like just experimenting with cocaine, for example, is insane. Like in a modern context, to read a doctor talking like that is absolutely astounding.
Actually, yeah. And you
But
know what? My grandma's catalogs would have, she had old Montgomery Ward catalogs where you could order cocaine, you could order heroin, you could order, it was still all this stuff. There just wasn't enough information.
sure.
Uh,
Well, a lot of
or
things
have,
just weren't made illegal until the '70s. I think marijuana was like the first one back when they had the battle kind of between hemp and the paper industry, and everyone who's seen Citizen Kane knows how that turned out. Or
yeah,
whatever, but yeah, and then, like, it wasn't until, like, I think it was 1970, I could be, like, slightly off here, but I think it was under the Nixon administration that they passed this sort of sweeping bill, categorizing most, drugs, and that was a sort of a counter effort to the hippie movement in America. It was like there were so
no,
many it was a way to target, radical people, in general, like, because you could safely assume that, like, they're using drugs. If they're the Black Panthers, they probably are in the drug game. If they're the, hippies in the Haight-Ashbury, they're in the drug game. So that was the way to control people, is to, like, if we can illegalize that, we now have a precedent to search and to arrest these people regardless of what it is that we're actually after, you know? And that was a little bit better than having to assassinate them, which they did for the entire decade prior. So, uh, yeah.
well, and you know what? It's interesting that the especially with drugs, we can see this cyclical nature. Like even when I started studying the Freemasons, like the chaos and the order. So it almost seems like they brought in this culture of 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 freedom and this spontaneity and this drug usage. And then they come back in after, I would say that the consensus is that the drug, because, watching that happen for 20 years, people were clearly seeing that the drug movement was not working too. There
Well,
was,
yeah, I think when I said that stuff about, like, the sweeping laws against it, I framed it in such a way that it sounds like it's all bad. I don't think it was. Like, I think that that was, like, a necessary push and pull because
um,
to allow the '60s to continue into the '70s would have been a fucking disaster. I mean, it people talk so much about free love and about having all these psychedelic experiences and following the dead around the country, and what they don't talk about is just the overwhelming amount of disease and teen pregnancies and, physical, psychological, emotional abuse. It's made to sound like rainbows and unicorns when in fact it in many cases was very dark. Um,
absolutely, absolutely. And one of the guys, Jamie Wheel, he's a neuroanthropologist, and he would talk about going to Burning Man, and there would be these huge orgies and sex magic, psychedelics for everybody. But he said basically at 4 a.m. that the demons would come out, that everybody was coming down. They felt terrible. And there was this like sense that all the energy had been sucked out of the atmosphere.
yeah.
And so I also see Tyler, and I get what you're saying. I just, one of the things that I wanted to point out was like, humans, we tend to have a really short memory. So it's like, the heroin epidemic following Vietnam seems to be forgotten. And then by 2000, year 2000, everybody has almost, it's been occulted. So they're bringing back, oxycodone and essentially the prescription pill epidemic, which has just basically been an alchemization of heroin to changing to so it seems to be even like the war, the the wars in China and with England with opium throughout history. It's like, it seems to be cyclical
Mhm.
that
What
we go through these almost, I would say, patterns that we can kind of trace a little bit.
I never I never fell into any sort of opium problem. I've always hated opioids. Like, even when I, like, went to the dentist and they gave me, I don't know, like, Oxycontin or something like that, I hated it. Like, it made me feel terrible, and I just didn't wanna take it, but I know so many people go exactly the opposite direction. What was your experience with that? Like, you said you got injured while you were wrestling,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then yeah, like, how did you fall into that hole?
Well, growing up in Wichita, Kansas, I was very sheltered. I was in a middle class home. My father was somewhat of a mechanical savant. He is very much on the spectrum, never diagnosed, really never communicated much growing up. Very much the strong, silent kind of John Wayne. So most of the anything to do with drugs had been occulted from my life. I had never really experienced anything. My mom's a mathematics teacher. I was again kind of in a neighborhood where we didn't see a lot of that. My uncle he was the legend of Wichita. Like, he was a professional boxer. He fought Lennox Lewis. He was a big time MMA kickboxer. The man and he had a lot of charisma. So he was a bit of a celebrity back home. He had gotten into drugs after he retired from boxing.
Sure.
So this was kind of happening separately from, at least from my knowledge. But at 18, I was a straight A student. I excelled in school. When I hit puberty, I would say that the autistic element really came into play, because before puberty, I still didn't have a lot of anxiety. And so I was really phenomenal at sports because it was just repetition. I would practice the same move, the same motion over and over and over until I became really great at it. But it was in sixth grade that I all of a sudden became aware of an audience staring directly at me. And because of my past experiences, everybody felt that I should replicate what I did on the previous one. And I remember just being in complete panic where I couldn't even function. I couldn't move. And Tyler, I was really spiritual. Grew up in the church as a Presbyterian, and I would just pray. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and it just got worse. And I remember my neighbor saying, "Don't you know, you idiot, there is no God. That whole Bible's hogwash. There's no science in that Bible." And so I can remember the moment where I just lost faith. I lost faith in myself. I lost faith in the world around me. And I really became depressed. So Tyler, most of high school, when I got home from school, I would sleep for 3.5 hours. And sometimes I would just sleep through the whole entire night because of so much energy in the school. There was so much noise. I could hear everybody's thoughts. And I just didn't want to be there anymore. And so by the time my senior season in wrestling came around, when I started taking opioids, I basically jumped on the dark side. I was living like there was no tomorrow. And there was so much peace in that. From a guy that was so mathematical and so analytical, to be a free spirit, to be like, I don't care if I live or die, I'm going to do this anyway. And so I jumped in with a bunch of renegades. I got a job basically traveling with this old philosopher. He was a truck driver, and he taught me more about life than about building scaffold. But in that period, I was introduced to a bunch of neck construction workers who were all wayward, lost souls. We would work 500 foot up in the air with no safety equipment. We were all borderline insane.
Yeah.
And they introduced me to the school of hard knocks with all kinds of drugs that I had never been around. And I thought I was Johnny Knoxville. I really did. But there was so much freedom in that, Tyler, until there became physical, spiritual, and mental deterioration. And what I realized was, just like I had the desire to drink, to have shelter, to have water, to breathe air, I could not stop. Those were all circumvented by, first I have to use. And if I couldn't get drugs, I was still very much kept all my honor and my dignity. I would never steal. I tried to be honest and authentic in every area of my life, but I was helplessly addicted to heroin and methamphetamine.
Why the combination of the two?
Well, RVCA, I'm a big surfer nowadays and I like to snowboard. RVCA talks about this balance of opposites, and I can see it in my daily life. whether it be waveform, particle, whether it be set, Solaris, whether it be dark, night, there seems to be these extremes. So when you go into one realm, which would be the opioid realm, there is such a release of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine that you are in a pure state of bliss. And for me, it was very much an upper. The amphetamines would allow me to stay awake throughout the experience. So I could basically, instead of going into a slumber, you would take, you could compare it to alcohol and caffeine. When you mix those two, you kind of get that butterfly effect in the middle. And
I was literally going to bring this up before you said that, but like, I never got into heroin or meth at all. But my equivalent to this was like it was caffeine and then alcohol and weed too. It was like I would drink massive amounts of caffeine at the beginning of the day. Like I'm talking, like I would put a shot of espresso in a cup of coffee, kind of stupid shit, or or whatever, and then come 5 o'clock, okay, and then it was just do everything I can to be asleep by midnight. So from 5 o'clock on, it's like beer, weed, uh, whatever. But I totally get what you mean, where you're constantly sort of like what goes up must come down, and you're sort of chemically trying to play ping pong all the time with your
absolutely. Christopher Knowles talks about it all the time. He said he was trapped in a pharmacological hell. And the Buddhists talk about when we seek pleasure, when we continuously seek pleasure, we will actually go into the hell realm. So Tyler, even though they weren't the same drugs, it takes us to the same place. Because and I'm sure that's where you found yourself.
I think an alcohol addiction versus a hard drug. The key difference is that at the worst of my drinking, I lived in a place that was directly above a wine store, across the street from 2 grocery stores that both had liquor licenses, and a gas station. And I'm talking all within 5 minutes of walking from each other, and in 24 hours a day. So that makes it a lot harder to abstain, I think, than it necessarily chemically needs to be. The other thing is that with alcohol withdrawal, you'll actually fucking die. You know what I mean? Like your body will like seize up on itself because it's so used to it. Versus from what I understand, you could totally educate me here. Withdrawing from heroin is really freaky, but it won't like kill you. It's like train spotting, I think, is sort of the best thing that I have reference for what that would be like.
No, you're spot on. Spot on. In this quest to find myself, because Tyler, I just never wanted to give up. But I do remember being in a Wichita detox facility.
Sure.
And it was the free facility. And I was in a room with 13 heroin addicts, all puking on each other with no medications to detox off. We didn't get ibuprofen.
Sure.
I mean, we were eating cereal for breakfast. It was a rough go. But in that was now you can die, but it is very it's very rare.
Right.
But in that facility, I've watched alcoholics die in rehab of the grand mal seizures.
Yeah. I mean, dude, having withdrawal from alcohol, even when you're being treated for it, like if you're not asleep, it can cause you to hallucinate. This happened to me. Like I was full blown, like from my perspective, I was having like a spiritual experience. But I mean, from the hospital's perspective, I'm hallucinating, right? For like 3 days. It took a long time to like recover just to get back to baseline. And that was pretty hard. And I wasn't like, to be honest with you, I know a lot of people who are alcoholics, and I don't even think I begin to crest the middle of that standard deviation, whatever that bell curve looks like. I just think I was like pretty bad, like.
Yeah, no, Tyler, being around, I really much pride myself like a military person. I've always been a man of discipline and honor and pushing the limits. And so I find myself around a lot of people that were former military, and our current military. And you don't know how many times I've heard that story.
Yep.
Guys in the Air Force that developed a drinking problem, and it's, you don't really want to go to your commander, I don't think, because there's such a stigma. And I know that's changing.
No, people don't. Yeah, people don't generally tell their commanders about their alcohol unless usually it's because someone gets a DUI or has some other incident. They literally call it an alcohol related incident. Like if you get into some other kind of trouble and alcohol is involved, like you were drinking at the time, that's like a mandatory. Like you're gonna go talk to. We're not necessarily going to do anything to you, but you are definitely going to go talk to somebody about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think the Air Force, I can't speak for the other branches, but I'm sure it's very similar. Have come a long way in terms of kind of redirecting people who have, even if it's like a drug problem, if you self-identify, like let's just say you have a coke habit and you don't want to get kicked out of the military, it would be better for you to just go self-declare and check yourself into rehab then than it would be for them to find out some other way, right?
Yeah.
And
Because did you stop drinking after you left the military?
oh yeah, it
Or-
was years after. Honestly,
Oh,
it
nice.
got worse after I left the military because I think that as much as I was a functional alcoholic to some degree while I was serving, for that at least 8 or 12 hours a day that I was in uniform, there was no negotiating. I was just not going to drink or be drunk during that time, right?
Yeah.
There were like real consequences to that. And I think
Oh,
after
absolutely.
I no longer had that structure pre-built into my life and I could just do whatever I wanted, there was a couple years there when I was like, "Oh fuck, I could just do whatever I want." Like there's no rules. Yeah, like I could if I want to wake up on Saturday and just start drinking in the morning and go to sleep at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, there's no one's gonna tell me otherwise, and no one's gonna come knocking on my door, tell me to go do whatever. So, it was really easy to kinda fall into that trap. Yeah, but I totally get what you mean with the going between the 2 poles of, like, well, if I take too much of this downer, so then I gotta take this other thing so that I could still stay awake or whatever, or I'm trying to come down from taking too much fucking meth, so I need to, stick myself with this needle so I can actually get some rest. And, the thing is that it never works. That's the hard part for me is like when I kinda distance myself from all of it, look back on it, I'm like, every day was this kind of constant battle between those 2 drugs to balance me out, and never once did I get the balance right. Not even close, like
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And that, now, did you end up going to Alcoholics Anonymous, or what was your path back to health?
Well, I know I wanted to quit for a really long time, and I just kinda, like, really couldn't. I was
Yeah.
I think, getting into the relationship that became my marriage was, like, kind of at the very beginning, sort of I knew I needed to be better because I wanted to be better for another person, you know what I'm saying? Like, I felt like I was this is a burden that I'm carrying around, it's gonna weigh it down anybody that I'm with. So that was kinda like the first real push of, like, I need to get myself under control, and I had also just moved back to the United States at the time too. So I had a lot going on. I'm like, "I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with my life," all that kinda stuff.
Where did you move to then from?
So I moved from, Denmark, where I'd lived for, like, 2 years. I moved first to Alabama, which is where my family's from, like, South Alabama.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Right, and I was just gonna, like, cause I keep all my stuff there, like, when I moved to Europe, I left all my stuff at my parents' house. I'm like, "Okay, I'll go back there, I have severance at the time, so I was just, like, take a few months to regroup and figure out what I wanna do." Um, and what I ended up doing was moving in with my then girlfriend. She lived in Arizona, so I moved to Arizona, right? And I was drinking like a fucking horse still at this point. Like it was a problem. I would wake up in the morning, the first thing I would think about was drinking most of the time, right? And if I went too long, I would, get not like I was having like seizures, but I was definitely get like shaky. It feels like if you have diet, and probably to a degree, there is a lot to do with this is sugar intake. Forget about alcohol, but if you're drinking fucking red wine and shit all the time,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah. And forget about having a healthy diet around that too, because most of the time, you're drinking so much you forget to eat or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then at 2 a.m. you're scarfing down food to try to make up for it, and then you pass out and whatever. But I think like the thing that made me get sober was, first of all, I was really suffering with it to the point where I would be like waking up in bed and then like feeling terrible and crying, and like I was alone for a couple weeks. So one day I was like praying, like, please God, give me a reason to just stop doing this. Like, clearly I don't have the willpower to just stop drinking of my own accord. I've been trying for so long and it's just not working. So that day, I had to go pick up my wife. She at the time was still my girlfriend, but I went to go pick her up from the airport. I brought her back home, and she asked me to open up her suitcase when we got back to the house. And when I did, she had baby clothes saying like, "Hey, we're gonna be parents." She
Oh,
just found
that's
out while she was on vacation. So I did not drink anymore after. Like, that was my moment. That was kind of like, okay, the answer to my prayers. It was like,
yeah, yeah.
now I have that reason, and I just haven't touched alcohol since.
No, that's amazing. I heard Pierre Sabak says that women teach us how to become men.
Yeah, for sure.
They teach us how to act, how because again, I originally got sober in 2014,
Right,
and I couldn't do it for me, but I could do it for my 5-year-old son.
right. Yeah,
And there was something about needing something bigger than ourselves.
even just a
And
pet or something, even if it's just
yeah,
to.
absolutely, absolutely.
But
Yeah,
we
like
value other things more than we value ourselves. Like, statistically, you are more likely to make sure your dog takes medicine that it gets from the vet than you are to accurately administer to yourself your own prescription drugs,
that's
you know?
oh, absolutely. No, I believe it. I got cleaned up in the Alcoholics Anonymous rooms because
Yeah.
where we were at, there was no treatments. And well, we did have treatment centers. They were $150,000 and they weren't having a lot of success. So at the end of the road, it was like an old, crusty old building with a bunch of AA guys that kind of pointed out the root of addiction is selfishness and self-centeredness. And when we can get away from that, then we can start to begin to heal again.
It's hedonism, by definition. Addiction is
Absolutely.
just full-blown, unadulterated, unfiltered hedonistic behavior, and
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in my path, and it's taken a couple tries. I got sober for 3 years. I'm lived the program. Tyler, when I relapsed, I could not stop using it. I would stop for a month. I would get cleaned up. I'd go to rehab. I'd come out. I'd have some big business idea. And then I'd get a new girlfriend. And then I would still struggle with the autism stuff. Like,
right.
what do I say to her? How do I communicate? Am I going to be funny? Am I going to be exciting enough? And so I knew that if I took the opioids, I'd always be the class clown. And so this last go around, I had it basically evolved into doing things that I never said I was going to do, which was needles. I never considered that I would ever be using a needle. I had
How are you taking heroin before the needle?
Before the needle, I was actually mostly doing Oxycontin.
Oh, okay.
I was doing Percocets, Lortabs. I didn't want to take that next step, really.
Right.
Even with the
Saving
amphetamines,
money.
saving money, even though it was more expensive I could have bought heroin and meth cheaper.
Yeah.
But, when they cracked down on prescription painkillers, essentially they were off the streets. You couldn't buy them. So you were left with heroin and meth. They were coming from the drug cartels that were coming from China mostly, or Afghanistan, or wherever from Laos, wherever it comes. If there's a desire, it will be produced. But at that point, I started overdose, and so I started journeying into these other realms.
Right.
I didn't know because I was not into the metaphysical at the time. Very nuts and bolts, very analytical. But I remember going into these realms and being very confused and not knowing who I was and not knowing where I was at. And so anyways, I had a friend, he says, God, he goes, I watched a Joe Rogan episode on YouTube, and they're having extreme success with ayahuasca and with psychedelics healing addiction.
Yep.
So I started searching. I could not find anywhere that couldn't find a center, couldn't find anything at all, except for a drug dealer. So my current fiance right now, she was able to find some magic mushrooms that came from a cornfield in the middle of Augusta, Kansas. She gave them to me that night this would have been about 6 years ago. And I had a very similar experience the first time I took opioids. This was more of a spiritual experience that I was directly connected to spirit, that during this incarnation, I am who I am. And I came in with a full plan from this imaginary realm. And when you come in, it seems like everything is basically been occulted. You've been placed in a state of amnesia where you don't remember what you had basically set yourself up for, but it's a gradual remembering. And anyways, later, I still couldn't get sober just with the magic mushrooms. But on March 29th, 2020, I went to a retreat center in Orlando, Florida. It was called Soul Quest Ayahuasca. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And at the time, Tyler, I was prescribed to Suboxone and Adderall as a way to kind of transition from some of the harder drugs into sobriety. But I couldn't stop taking those. And they had a very strict policy that you could not take prescription drugs 2 weeks prior to the retreat because of interactions with ayahuasca and with more specifically the Suboxone, because they had let me know upon arrival, as long as I didn't take Suboxone, I'd be fine. But somebody had previously died there at the retreat center taking Suboxone. Well, here I am, spent my last $1,000 on this retreat, and I wouldn't be able to do it because I took Suboxone. So I just told them a big fat lie, and I said, no, I didn't take Suboxone. Anyways, the next day we did a macro dose journey. It was 95 degrees. I was laying on the Florida ground with basically in the dirt, in the grass, like in nature. And the previous night's experience didn't really hit me that much, so I wasn't too worried about it. And about 30 minutes into the whole experience, somebody literally was rushed to the hospital. Every one of the shaman that were there, the guides, they all took this guy and they took him to the hospital. And I remember myself, my heart, again, I felt a complete stop of my heart, my brain, and I was definitely overheating, and I couldn't speak, and there was nobody there to see me. And I'm like, man, this is how I'm going out, Tyler. This is it. And there was a young woman that came over and she saw that I was struggling, and I kind of mouthed, I took Suboxone, and they panicked. They panicked. They tried to stay calm, got everybody around me. And I was going in and out of consciousness for a long time. And I remember I was walking through the African savannah, and I was actually an elephant. And I mean, this is crazy because it's metaphorical, but I was this elephant, and I see I see looks like a hurting, like an animal that's down. And I go to investigate it, and I start to look at this baby elephant, and it morphs into myself within a coffin. And I look up, and everybody is talking about me, and they're saying, oh, he was such a nice young gentleman. He was so kind, and he was always so honest. You can't believe another soul was taken by addiction. And I looked up, and I saw everybody crying. And I saw more specifically, a young little girl who looked about to be the age of 2 or 3. And she said, Dad, don't give up. There's so much more for you in the future. Just don't give up, please, Dad. And anyways, I made it through the experience, and didn't use. And a year later, my daughter was born on that exact day. And she came into the world, and man, it was just, again, it was another one of those kind of milestones. Like, man, I'm on the right path. I'm headed in the right direction. I know that every step I take brings progress. All I got to do is just keep moving forward and not let these distractions, not let this voice in my head basically redirect me from what my path truly is. And I've got to stay in the spirit. The only way I can stay in the spirit, staying in the heart, because there was some sort of feeling that the the human genome had been altered at some point. And everybody talks about how, oh, we were dumb monkey apes. And then all of a sudden, these reptilians come along and they alter our DNA and they make us so smart. I found the opposite to be true, that we were altered, our lives were shortened, that getting into the work of Damien Dumar and Nathaniel Gillis, the necrogenetics, I'm a big biology guy. And from what I understand, they use dead DNA material of humans to create the Homo sapiens sapien, which would be controlled through a back door, which is called the subconscious mind. And that would be that archonic voice that would always be in the head. And I don't know if some of this is karma, how much of it is just inevitable, how much it could all just not be true. But there is some resonance that I felt that I needed to at least investigate everything from a fresh start, that I needed to take everything that I knew from academia and everything that I knew from science and throw it down the drain and then rebuild it. And again, the biggest mistake, I heard somebody in your podcast say, Zachariah Sitchin is a pseudo scholar. And I don't think that.
So that was Dr. Justin Sledge.
And, I think he was great.
I think he's a brilliant guy. I just think that he comes from that world of academia. Like, he literally is a doctor, like he spent most of his life in school.
Absolutely.
And that's really how they address things. It's not like a full blown sort of like, I'm sure he would say the same thing about Grant Hancock. He may have said the same thing about in that same interview. And I try to just think about that sort of thing as like, okay, that's his opinion and it's a valid enough opinion, because I wouldn't say this about Grant Hancock. I think that his research is as legitimate as could be. His conclusions you may disagree with, but the things that he uncovers are questions worth asking. But Sitchin, I have my own I agree with him, and I was kind of trying to get him to say the same thing that I would have said, which is that I don't believe Zachariah Sitchin could really read definitively Sumerian. I just don't think it's possible. That's why I question his ideas. I think if Sitchin had published the 12th Planet as a novel, I think I said this to Tim too, that people would think it's one of the best novels ever. I'm reading Foundation right now, which you studied Freemasons,
Yeah.
Reading Isaac Asimov's Foundation right now, which is like a super, super big book in the world of Freemasonry. I don't know why. It's a work of fiction. Several of the books that you encounter in Freemasonry are works of fiction. Like The Brother of a Third Degree, these really epic novels, but that kind of teach the lessons that they're interested in.
And no, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that allegorically, the 12th planet makes a lot of fucking sense. I think that scientifically, we have no fucking clue if this guy can or cannot really read Sumerian, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of consensus amongst scholars what that would look like,
Oh, no, and Tyler, I think you're going to be really surprised with my take on Sitchin.
Yeah.
Because I think he is a pseudo scholar. I really do, to an extent, because here's my argument on this is that I think that what we'll do is we'll throw out all of Sitchin's research because of some inconsistencies. And that's the biggest thing is I don't want to throw out all of his work. What I did find about Sitchin was that he was directly connected to the House of Rothschild. And that's going to be very important to know. And also to Inky. And I also have found connections with Mossad and to the Masons. And so when I make connections like that, I just say, we cannot trust the validity of his work because of that, because of these connections, that they can tell the truth in-house, but that this information has been classified to an extent not for you and I's class, only for the Masons, only for the Brotherhood, only for Messiah, only for the bloodline. So, and I did it. Sitchin and Hancock both come from the London School of Economics, which you have to be a brilliant person to get in there.
So does Mick Jagger.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah, there's look, I'm not discrediting what you're about to say. I'm just saying
Oh,
a
yeah, no.
lot of people went to the London School of Economics. Like,
Absolutely. Well, here's my thing is that just from, there are certain things that can't be said,
right.
or they have to be said in code. And this is what I've kind of found. This has been my, I guess, thesis about the phenomenon. When we give away the phenomenon, you essentially, it has to be written abstractly. It has to be written in mathematical code. It has to be written in music, architecture, through fiction. And you can take those fictions as similitude, but you can't just give them away. You have to, it would be like, for a young person to just, instead of going out and exploring and finding things out for themselves, just being like, here's how it is. So, I listened to, like, Jordan Maxwell. He talks about how Sitchin was a brilliant man.
Right.
And that because people only get to see the surface level, that they're just like, oh, he's a pseudo scientist and he's not a real researcher.
My issue with
dismissing
him as a pseudoscience, that I understand how you feel like when someone says, "Oh, he's not a real scholar," or "He's a that's pseudoscience," or what I don't like is that once you've used that pejorative term, you no longer are required to, like, address any of the questions that get brought up. So, like, forget about Sitchin, like, just like Von Daniken's books where he just asks questions. He's like, "What about this? What do we think about that? Could it be that this was, something like, could it be?" And everything's sort of presented in that way. And I feel like just so many people look at something like that, dismiss it as pseudoscience, and then just don't address the questions that got asked. That was what maybe if I have Dr. Sledge on again, and I probably will, that's one of the things that I would like try to readdress and retackle, because I think in that first interview, I didn't do a really good job of making that point. I was just I mentioned that I read them all, and I was like, kind of, what's your take on that? And then I didn't get any further than just, oh, that's just pseudoscience.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? If you were going to ask me point blank, what do you think about Sitchin? I really like him, and I think he was a great researcher, and I think he has done a lot for humanity. Again, when somebody is connected to certain groups, it really does take away from the true scientific, I would say, because you are kind of already making certain assumptions based on what you have believed, But Sitchin, through an occult lens, if you look at all of his work through an occult lens, it makes so much sense. I'm like, spot on, Tyler.
Everything makes more sense when viewed from an occult lens. And
absolutely.
That's what's so frustrating, because I feel like in the religious world, especially, one of my favorite podcasts lately is, like, big shout out. I'm going to try to get this dude on my show too. There's this show called Almost False. It's hosted by this dude named Gabriel. And all he does is just interview people who've had, in his own words, extraordinary experiences, but it's all like, I got really deep into a satanic cult or witchcraft or something like that, had a near-death experience, and then I came to Christ. Every episode is like this. You know what I mean? But it just I'm just glad it exists, because there's so many of these interviews that you can just listen to and get all these different, it's a lot of data, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the guy doing the research, like, he's just really, I mean, clearly he comes from a Christian point of view, and that's fine with me, but I'm just saying, he's really good at just letting people kind of tell their stories and kind of drawing out, going further along, but not like, not judging at any point. But one of the things that's really interesting as you listen to that is that like every single one of these stories where someone gets into the occult, they always bring it up in those, or if you listen to priests when they talk about this kind of stuff, whether that be Orthodox or Catholic or whatever, are always just saying like, there's a direct correlation. I think even our, ghost hunter friends would say there's a direct correlation between experiences with these phenomena and things like drugs and the occult. Like, if it's a pretty good chance if you find someone who's playing with Ouija boards or tarot cards, they would tell you that if you see someone who has that stuff, there's a good chance that they're, having negative interactions with what they call demons from their perspective, right?
Absolutely.
But the truth is that there's lots of people out there who are dabbling into this stuff, and it is true that when you do find these bad things, that it is someone who's done this and gone awry in a lot of cases. But that doesn't mean that it's like inherently. I don't want to say it's not dangerous. It's certainly dangerous if you come from a perspective that believes in the spiritual world. Someone who's just like playing with a Ouija board in their basement, giggling, and they don't know what they're talking to. That's like a super stereotypical story. Or someone who's being, I don't know, experiencing night terrors and being abducted by aliens or something like that, or shadow man kind of experiences. There's a distinct difference, I think, between the two facts that stand. One is that 100% of cases like this involve something that has to do with the occult. The other one that is not 100% of people who are researching the occult or know about the occult are having these negative experiences directly. Get what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But the way that people are taught to interface with this stuff is that it's all 100% bad. It's 100% like you're just begging to be courted by the devil if you even touch this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
ML Bullock was on my show I think it was in like October or November last year, but she's a paranormal researcher, but you were talking about allegories and symbols and stuff like that. She only tells true stories about her research, but she does it all through the lens of fiction. So every one of her books is like a fictionalized version of a real case, just to avoid like what I was saying about Sitchin earlier. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because the people who are going to believe it are going to believe. That's one of the most interesting things that I have learned in life. Fiction or nonfiction, the label does not matter. People will believe in what they want to believe in.
Oh, absolutely.
If like Harry Potter sounds more appealing than I don't know, like Something from Nothing by Neil Strauss or whatever that guy's name is. Yeah. If it sounds more appealing to you, then you're going to believe in Harry Potter more.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And listening to your history, Tyler, throughout some of your other episodes,
sure.
There was. So I got sober 5 years ago after my experience with ayahuasca.
Right.
And when I got sober, I was so tired of statistics. I wanted to, again, I needed to, I had a lot of time and I needed to fill some time. So it just started originally as I'm really interested in history. Maybe I'm going to start studying history again. Sure. So I went back to where I was taught that history began, which was Sumer. And then, as I started to look on the different platforms for information on Sumer, I run across Billy Carson.
Hold on. I got some of his books in here somewhere. I have his Emerald Tablet Compendium, and I have the other one that he wrote with that. What's the Anunnaki book with that other?
With Matthew LaCroix.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Some of them. Look, I like Billy Carson, but those are some of the most poorly edited, shitty fucking books.
Absolutely. Yeah. Billy.
Like really bad. I personally, I think I could have with Microsoft Word published a better looking text, but the information.
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. If you love this show and you love supporting indie video games, please take a moment to check out In the Keep's upcoming Stellar Valkyrie. Built in the GZ Doom engine, this retro first-person shooter puts you in the universe of space bird bounty hunter Falco, who is on a mission to save his ex-girlfriend from the evil Black Star cult. Just type birdgame.space, that's BIRD game.space into your browser. Hit enter, smash the wish list button, and stay tuned.
Is the information. So.
No, absolutely. And right now, Billy is kind of the, I would say, the butt of a lot of jokes in this community. He's kind of one of those guys that isn't being labeled as a grifter, even though I don't really think that he is. I think that Billy isn't a specialist in any field. He just knows a little bit about everything.
He makes himself look really bad when he says something as if it is 100% fact proven true, and then like clearly doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about when he's in a conversation with like an expert on something. You know what I mean? So like he has this like synoptic view of like the story he's trying to tell, the information he's trying to convey, and I think he gets so lost in being definitive about it. Like he's so certain of his point of view. And then like one of the things that came up with him was, you know, he cites, well, if you look at some of these extra biblical texts, they will indicate that I think his thing was like Jesus did not die or something like that. You know, Jesus wasn't crucified. And his sources for this are very easily dismissed, not because they're extra biblical, but because they're like, I can prove to you that that's a fraudulent document. Like I can show you why that was written in 1600, you know, AD, and not.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And
I was wondering if that's who you were talking about when you with reading Sumerian.
Yeah,
because in that Joe Rogan interview, Joe point blank asked Billy, "Can you read Sumerian?" And I'm pretty good with body language, and you could kind of pick up that he was joshing him a little bit.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think Billy Carson can read English.
Yes.
And I'm not. I would love to talk to. I'm super open minded, and I am a fan of his work. And I even had his TV app, the Forbidden Knowledge TV channel, just so I could watch a couple of the documentaries that were on there.
Absolutely.
And honestly, a lot of it is crap. Like his Anunnaki documentary is like him, and he's just like standing in front of a green screen telling you stuff that you could see on YouTube.
Yeah.
And then the other documentary that I watched, it was like about Antarctica, and it was like a super low budget documentary, and it gets to the point where they're talking about like green ooze coming out of the cracks of Antarctica, like in the X-Files. And look, I think that that's all really cool and entertaining and fun, but it makes me question how much. I'm not saying his ethics are like bad. Like I'm not I'm not saying he's a straight up grifter where he's just trying to make a money grab. I'm saying I think he's not very good at filtering bullshit out. So like the amount of truth you're getting out of Billy Carson, you got to filter out however much BS is also in there. Not because he's lying to you, but because he clearly doesn't filter a lot. He doesn't do the hard research. He's not necessarily having dialogue peacefully with other experts in their fields. So what he should be doing is constantly readjusting what he thinks based on new information, but he seems to not do that.
No, absolutely. And when I heard his take on the Robert Morningsky material, I was just like blown away. I'm thinking, you know, it almost seems like he just again didn't do any research. He might have just taken little bits and clips out of you know, potential interviews and put it all together. And so I just wasn't impressed. And really, I guess that's kind of, Tyler, what I wanted to talk to you about was the reason why I call it the Angelic Symphony was for the last 7 years, I really have been kind of, I would say, mute per se, outside of my fiance and children in my day-to-day operations. I have been quiet.
That's good.
I just wanted to listen because there's, like you said, there's so much data, there's so much information, there's so much material. And throughout this process, I found the best minds in the world. I mean, polymaths, authors, musicians, artists, common folk, everybody. I have listened to their message and each person seems to be telling a slightly different story. And so Nathaniel Gillis talks about how the phenomenon almost comes to us, and it creates this very unique abstract reality for each individual. And so what I found it to be really difficult to try to decipher all of the brilliant minds that we listen to every day throughout podcasts, lectures, books. And how am I going to organize all this? So what I did was I took all the data together, and it started to form what I would call is patterns. And in the patterns, I could see different stories that were being told. And the best way that I found to decipher all the information was just to take in a researcher like Billy Carson. Billy, believe it or not, according to the mathematical probability, he was right about a lot of the I would say about his general thesis, a lot of his doctrines, a lot of his information was correct, but he didn't cite any sources. He didn't provide any references. It was all Billy's stuff.
He and Tim both have the same problem where they try to put direct web links in a text. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, that can be.
And then it's like a dead link, or it's like that's your source. Like it's just some article on the internet. It makes you look. It makes you look like a joke next to a scholar. It's the same thing with Terrence Howard, right? Terrence Howard had this, brilliant, I don't know, channeling of he understood something mathematically that a lot of people didn't get. He had his thesis on, it was on, I think Rogan and a few other shows where he was showing these models of how he thinks gravity works. And he's got these patents for these machines that he keeps talking about, right? And when faced with scrutiny, it's like, you did have some really cool ideas, but the world of math is going to tear you apart because you're just simply you're not doing the things that they expect from you. And in some ways you are dead. You're so wrong because you don't understand what the fuck you're talking about in so many ways. And yet still there's a kernel of truth here that you did find out. That was a very interesting way of viewing it, but it's the same in every every one of these Alex Jones too,
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's funny you brought up those names because those, I was trying to find. So throughout the Angelic Symphony, I would rate each brilliant author or polymath by level of character. Now, Tim Kelly did score the highest as far as somebody that I genuinely think is a moralist.
You're giving people a survey, or how are you scoring this thing?
Well, there's a lot of factors. One is character. So I'm reading body language. I'm going through all the old materials, trying to see if anything was deceptive, if I felt like the person was being deceptive, if they were potentially plundering other people's work to steal their ideas and use them without referencing them. So Tim got 100 out of 100 on character.
Sure.
But one of the parts, like you said, his general makeup of his story is, I guess, it's all supported by books like R.A. Boulay, Flying Dragons and Serpents, which is a phenomenal book. But Tyler, it was written in the 1980s.
Oh, yeah.
And I just don't know R.A. Boulay, the name Ra. When you see Ra in there, you know that there's a secret society connection probably somewhere, potentially. And that worries me. But even Tony Bigsby, The Secret in the Bible, I really like Tony Bigsby and I like his work. But if he turns out to have been a plant or somebody that was working to get information put into culture, then the whole thing falls apart. Because it's kind of like a math equation. If one variable is off, the whole equation goes awry. And you can see it, I don't know if you play college basketball March Madness, but when you fill out a bracket and you select a certain team, if they lose, then your whole bracket falls apart. So, in this alternative community, I'm kind of looking at at least from my opinion, who got the most hits as far as, Tim did score really high on character. He also scored the highest as far as health, healing, alternative methods for regaining your health, optimal civilization. Tim was probably the most knowledgeable on how to build an optimal civilization.
I think he just needs to learn how to market himself. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah, like from my perspective, it's like, and I had a few people even write at me about this, like his, his website where he's just like, okay, just email me and I'll send you a PDF of my book, for an undisclosed amount of money or whatever. Just seems so like 1996. He needs to, like get into his stuff into online stores or some or even if it's just like Kindle or whatever, just where it's easily accessible and not like PDF trading, which
Yeah,
he's working on. I know he's working on that, but
yeah.
I would also say, to get back to your point, it's sort of a house built out of straw kind of thing with basing your theory of how the history of the entire world on some of these ideas that we don't like. Okay, sure, that's your source, but what is that person's source? And if any one of these things falls apart, then your entire idea like sort of falls apart. And I think there's like a lot of room for like a general picture that okay, so let's just say he's right about the Anunnaki or or the Pleiadians, right? That That's great, but that doesn't mean that he's also right about, geoengineering, and it doesn't mean that he's also right about there's a lot of this, like,
That's
he believes in 2 things, which is, like, one of them I could be like, "Okay, maybe," and the other one I'm like, "Okay, I think you really fucking you might be on drugs, the fact that you believe this to be true."
yeah.
And I try to be super open-minded, like, I even looked more into some of the stuff that he sent me about geoengineering, and I'm like, "Yeah, nah, dude, you gotta I think you need to point your time and your intelligence at something better than this." Like, and he also seems like the kind of person who's a bit handicapped by that kind of stuff, where he's so overwhelmed about doing everything as ethically and perfectly as possible that, you never really get anything done. So I worry someone like him will go so far down a rabbit hole that is not the one that we want them to go down, right? If he goes down rabbit hole A, he might discover something really, truly interesting. If he goes down rabbit hole B, he's just gonna, be stuck there
Oh,
forever and never get out, and it won't lead to anything useful.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when we get into this galactic history,
Sure, yeah,
really at the end of the day, Tyler, it's all conjecture. It's all speculation.
yes,
I mean, it really is. So we could argue you know, until the sun goes down about, what happened previously to now, but really, there's just not enough evidence right now. Well, and some of it is what I liked about Tim was what I found was guys like Graham Hancock who have channels with 20 million people on them. I did not find the same level of character within Graham Hancock. Even Greg Carlwood, who's one of my, this is like, I, when I found the higher side chats with Greg Carlwood, it put the work of Billy Carson, Gaia, Lynn Caston, even Tim Kelly, it really helps focus. When I looked at it through an occult lens, it started coming together. And I found guys like Barry Fitzgerald and Steve Mera. Uh, I really started to make some progress, but
how do you get in touch with all these people? People always ask me that too, so I figure it's only fair to ask it on the air.
gosh, to be honest, Tyler, Tim Kelly's the only one that I reached out to. I was listening to Forbidden Knowledge News, and
Okay.
I told you about my mentor, who was an old truck driver. I call him the truck driving philosopher because this man was brilliant. He passed away, and when you get into this kind of research and you get into these topics, there's not going to be very many people that you can communicate and have conversations with about this. So it was a lonely world, and I never met any of these people, but I've listened to them. I would say over and over and over, that hermeneutical spiral where you get to know their material so well that it changes and morphs, and you begin to get to know the person. But Tim was one I felt like I was meditating and I just felt like, hey, this is going to be your mentor. And so I reached out to Tim and I said, Tim, I've been silent for the last 5 years. I haven't talked to anybody about this stuff. I have a lot of data and information. I would just like to have a friend to be able to share with back and forth. So him and I have just been emailing each other.
Yeah.
And I did interview Tim. But again,
for your podcast, which is still upcoming.
It is.
Right.
It is. And Tyler, as you know, like I got 4 children. I have a beautiful fiance. We moved to the Space Coast, which is right here in Cape Canaveral, Melbourne, Florida. We're 15 minutes from NASA. We're 20 minutes from Space Force. We're another 30 minutes from the Collins Aerospace. And I live pretty much on the grounds of an ancient city known as Window. Now, from what I understand, this was ancient Poseidon. A Dr. Alexander Koltepen, he was a geologist and he started studying in the earth. And what he found was in the layers, a forgotten epoch, a forgotten time where humans potentially were more advanced than what we are today. And we're just playing catch up now. At least, and I don't know if that's true. Tyler, I really need more time to come up, to put together a final thesis. But it seems to be true because when I travel up and down the river, I can find all kinds of artifacts. I know that NASA did not choose that location without a lot of strategic planning. And I would say probably it seems to be energetic signatures. Wherever you go in the world, Rawlings, Kentucky, and I know you know this stuff, Mammoth Cave.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's an energetic signature everywhere you go that no matter the sands of time, that it recreates itself.
Well, how about like the entire town of Somerset, Kentucky is built on top of a huge quartz deposit. And it's also like the most paranormal city, like one of the most paranormal places in America.
Now, you're the only person I've ever heard that has ever known this because I will always mention this. And there's another quartz deposit right under Cincinnati, right under Sedona, which seems to have these positive magnetic anomalies, which seems to affect behavior. But you're absolutely right. Laura Knight Glossick, she is a scientist in the truest sense. And she found the same thing. She called them the Kentuckians.
Sure.
There were, and when I moved, so I lived in Bend, Oregon for a while, right next to Klamath Falls. And they talk about an advanced race.
I used to do the weather for Klamath Falls all the time.
Did you really?
Yeah. I put out weather warnings for them all the time. Yeah.
The natives there, now they speak of a group called the Wogas. And Robert Seffer cross-references this stuff. But they said they were extremely moral and they were of the highest honor and integrity. These people didn't lie. And supposedly they taught the natives in the area everything they know. And then they left. And they had, and this probably goes into these conversos coming across the Atlantic in 1492, being kicked out of Europe. And the natives thinking this is the same group that had been there before. And it's just a really, really interesting dynamic. But what I'm trying to say is, right now we're watching all of our systems fail. I am working 60 hours a week. Now, when I work completely alone. I'm doing pest control. I have one headphone in and I will listen to lectures all day long. And then I'll go back and I'll recap the lecture. I'll try to summarize it. And then I'll put all the notes together. And on the weekends, I put the notes together and I put them into a mathematical form, which I can see patterns. And then in the patterns, I kind of found the stories. But I've been trying to start a podcast. I've been trying to start a business, but it's like we're on a conveyor belt. We got to make $1,600 to be able to pay rent. All of our bills are like 75% of what our wage is. So me and my fiance have been trying to do this the right way. And it just seems like we're going nowhere. And so throughout my meditations and through my prayers, it really was I felt like I needed one opportunity to share myself with the world. And I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And when I met Tim and he directed me to you and I looked into your research, I was like, isn't this so synchronistic? Because, with your history into etymology and language and NHIs and your experience in the Air Force and alcoholism, like, this is the perfect person to interview me.
What's really interesting about all that stuff is that it's completely by coincidence. It's like I don't have like a deep background in paranormal stuff aside from just like a hobby interest, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, and like I didn't go join the Air Force looking for aliens, and I didn't find any either, so that didn't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, that's funny.
um, but so I was gonna bring this up earlier, but one of the key things to remember about the locations of all these places is that they largely choose them based on the weather, right? Because you want the weather conditions to be good. So that's why you put, aside from the loose hurricane, Cape Canaveral is a great fucking place to launch a rocket, straight
absolutely.
up through the atmosphere. Same thing with Vandenberg, California. Even though Vandenberg is like really, really foggy, it's like always foggy. So they'll launch a rocket and you won't even be able to see it. I knew people who've like gone to see SpaceX launch a rocket there, and like they travel and they stand there and it's like the rocket lifts off and you don't see it because it's so cloudy. But
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so in the evening time, we'll all go out and watch them. And my house will shake with so much vigor. When we first got here, we are like, what is going on? And they were truly spectacular.
so
But
this is let me
oh, go
finish
ahead.
this point real fast. I just want
Yeah.
to before I forget it. So what's interesting about like some of the research to do with like geospatial satellite imagery, especially when you're looking at infrared or lidar, all this kind of stuff, or geomagnetic anomalies. This is a key thing. So when you are looking at the like synoptic or like planetary scale weather patterns, one of the key ways that you know how the weather is going to go from early on is you're looking at what we call negative anomaly, right? So like a low pressure anomaly so it's like according to how it's usually on average this time of year and in this location, the pressure is abnormally low in that area, and that's how you know, okay, bad weather is coming from that, period. That's
Mhm.
for sure. The question is, the locations on the Earth and the way that the currents flow, and also the distribution of the magnetic poles seems like there are kind of key places all over the world where, conditions are good for these sorts of things, and the question is, do they choose these locations for the pyramids, whatever, knowing that beforehand? Or do they choose these things and then, like, when you look back at all the other factors, so if you cross-reference weather with, being on a deposit of something that has, like, a magnetic resonance of some kind, and you map all that together, is it just coincidence one time that leads to all of these other things sort of stacking up behind it? You get what I'm saying? Like, does it really constitute proof? Um, yeah, I'm sorry to go on that tangent, but I felt like I had to get that question out of me.
Yeah, no worries. And you know what? Honestly, weather, I don't want to be a Billy Carson. I don't know that much about weather,
Mhm.
but I do know that it seems like we have had the technology for some time to be able to manipulate, change, potentially. I don't know how much right now,
Mm.
but it does seem like we can do certain things. What's your opinion on that?
I'm just not convinced of this at all. I
Yeah.
have seen absolutely nothing that makes me think that this is true. I watched the entire, geo engine. Look, I am 100% open to talking to these people because I want to understand why they think what they think, and maybe there's some evidence that I'm just completely oblivious to, but I mean, like,
Yeah.
I was a meteorologist in the Air Force, and I'm telling you, like, the levels of conspiracy that would need to be in place to prevent people from knowing this for a fact is ridiculous. I get the whole idea that people think that HARP is, I don't know, shooting stuff into the ionosphere and somehow that's causing a high pressure system. So the idea is that they heat up the ionosphere which
Mhm.
is 2 layers above where weather happens. Weather only
Mhm.
happens in the troposphere, not in the stratosphere. and definitely not in the ionosphere. But the idea is that they're heating up those particles. That's causing a high pressure system. And then by causing the high pressure dome in that area, they can quote unquote steer where you would send a low pressure system. So something like a major storm, especially a hurricane, is a low pressure system. Somehow they think that this is like dialed in. Like they're so good at this that they can heat up the ionosphere in a perfect way to steer a hurricane between two high pressure systems. So that's like one part of it. Another part of it is like the contrail stuff. I'm fully open to the idea that I'm not even open to the idea of it. I know cloud seeding exists. That's true. Every contrail you see outside is not that. People have gone like way out of proportion with this. It's so simple how contrails work. When you're doing a weather forecast for a surveillance mission of some kind, like you want to send a spy plane or a drone over someone's else's territory to do reconnaissance, right? One of the key things as a weather forecaster you're asked to give them is the layer in which the humidity and the temperature is appropriate to create a contrail, because the last fucking thing you want to do is fly a spy plane through an area where it would produce contrails. And we know that area. So if you were seeing contrails that don't exist, like within that area, I could understand why you would be concerned. But just like pointing at every contrail you see when you live near an airport and saying like, clearly this is them spraying aluminum into the atmosphere. I just don't think that inconclusive.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to come up with something more convincing for me to like buy into that entire conspiracy. But yeah, I do believe, and this is not a joke. Like there are definitely cloud seeding experiments. There are people going out, but it's like flying small planes or drones into an already existing cloud to add more moisture to it so that you get more precipitation out of it. It's not steering pressure systems with ionospheric satellite shit sent from the HARP system.
No, absolutely. And you know what, Tyler, really, again, I would say in this world of alternative theories and alternative thinking, I would say that I just steer away from conspiracy. I'm like, I think that when you really start look, it's easy to overanalyze certain things. So I was like, what would be the most anomalous stories in our time space? Like, what do I think is the most poignant, relevant to this time? And what I did find was this connection to a binary twin star within our solar system. And, Jason of Archaics, are you familiar with his work at all?
I know the name, but I don't know his work.
So Jason is what I would say the world's best chronologist and the best in calendrics as far as studying calendars, studying patterns. And what I did notice was how censored I guess the classified nature of studying cyclical cataclysm and studying it in conjunction with comets, and more specifically, this binary twin star, which most people refer to as the dark star or Set. But it does seem like there is some sort of time frame in which this star returns. From what I found, the evidence does point that there was some sort of catastrophe in the ancient past, in which this star had basically collapsed in on itself, or there was something in which this star had basically, I would say, gone through its life cycle, and we were kicked off of its plane of ecliptic, and we were moved into this new plane with the new star, which is called Sol. A lot of people do connect the binary twin star to either Saturn or with Sirius. And so when you get into the Dogon of Mali, Africa, turn this off.
Africa keeps coming up a lot lately. It's been very interesting.
It does. And Africa really is the energetic center of our plane.
It's
And-
also what's interesting about Africa is that aside from Egypt, which is already way up for debate, right? What else do we really know about the history of Africa? I mean, the ancient history of Africa. I mean, we know what from European intervention forward, and virtually nothing.
No, absolutely. Now, I'm well read. I don't know if you know who Credo Mutwa is. Credo Mutwa?
Nope.
But he was interviewed by David Icke in the 90s, and he was a Zulu shaman that it was right around in the area of South Africa today. But he speaks of a hidden history of Africa in which is just, I mean, it is the most miraculous story I've ever heard. That there was once a great thriving empire in Africa, more specifically where the Sahara Desert is today.
Even more recently, I watched this really interesting documentary where they were discussing like the roots of Christianity in Africa, because as it turns out, like there are like pre-Islam, pre-Islam, there was already a really strong foothold of Christians like who were affirming Christ even before like the Orthodox and the Catholic Church formally did so. And then that's how you ended up with the church in Ethiopia, right, where we get the Book of Enoch and all that stuff, because they had preserved a lot of that stuff there in Africa long before it became mainstream in Europe, like long before Constantine or any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And people completely forgot about that in what, a couple hundred years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? So I guess to go back to Sitchin, I guess my biggest one of my biggest, I guess, problems with Sitchin's work is I think that everything happened a lot more recently than 432,000 years ago. And I think that is where the deceit lies.
It's insane to be talking in these terms, but like recently I've been getting like a lot of these different kind of date ranges and stuff. And it seems to me that like the medium is somewhere around like 250,000 years in the past. But it's really, really hard to determine because we're arguing in terms right now of like, are the pyramids 5,000, 6,000 years, not hundreds, tens, even tens of thousands is a big ask. So I don't know where that takes us. And I don't really think that the date of the pyramids necessarily matters to the overall story of like when were some of these things built. One of the things that Sitchin does very well is sort of laying out the map of the landscape, and like putting some of these cities, these ancient cities that you hear in a biblical context on a map, and then explaining like, and then they all fell, right? Then the flood happened, and then everything was rebuilt after that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I guess I'm trying to blend so many different brilliant minds and their work and try to put them all together. And similar to all of us, it seems like we are doing this as a co-collaborative process, that we're figuring this out together. And I think that I like to always go back to Robert Morningsky, and I know you love Morningsky.
Yeah, I'm a big fan.
But when he scored 100 out of 100 on character. I did not find him to be somebody that was deceitful or that would tell a lie. And you know what? When you look up Robert Morningsky on Google, you will find it will say, mother of 3 young dog babies. He likes to bake cookies in his kitchen, and it's all just nonsense. And so that tells me that Robert Morningsky is right over the target. And so, can I just explain a little bit about what happened in 1947?
Let's take a break right before we jump into this, because this is going to be like a long tangent. But let's go take a leak and stuff.
Sounds great.
Jump into that in the deep end. All right. So yeah, Robert Morningsky. I am like I'm a fan of his because of his appearances on the Art Bell show back in the day. And what's interesting, when you brought him up in our emails back and forth and everything, I was just like, that's such a weird fucking coincidence. Like, what a strange name to come up all these years later. Because from what I know, Robert Morningsky from like the Hale-Bopp comet, and all that stuff time frame, where he was, telling the stories of, is it, forgive me if I get this wrong, the Hopi tribes beliefs?
Well, kind of. So his mother was, she was a part of the Hopi,
Right.
and then his father was Apache.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And it was just telling all these like amazing stories that were, to his people, ancient history or mythology or whatever you want to call it. But, at that time, it was really like, it had a lot of people worried that this Hale-Bopp comet was going to be that. Obviously, it wasn't, but a lot of people had opinions about that comet. It's really funny to go back and listen to that stuff. That all happened when I was maybe a baby. I
Yeah,
I was
no.
born in 1995, so yeah. And then like there was Y2K, all that kind of stuff. But his commentary during that time frame is what I'm most familiar with. And here we are 30 years later.
Yeah, no, I heard about his story. I don't know if you're familiar with Lynn Caston.
Nope.
Lynn Caston is one of the top researchers in this field, at least, especially for the subjects that I'm interested in. I've found Lynn Caston to be phenomenal. Now, again, a lot of people, he had a lot of predictions that were incorrect. He had a lot of theories that were incorrect, but what he got right, he nailed. And he very similar to Tim, was trying to put together a somewhat of a timeline regarding ancient history. And so he would use different references and different personalities to help, I guess, build his argument. And so again, kind of like with Tim, if one of those, I guess, critical variables turns out to be even slightly off, the whole equation can be thrown off. So that's why I always beware of certitude. I try not to be definitive. This is this or this is that, because as we know, even with wave particle duality, that things may appear differently than what they really are. We have to be very careful using our eyes, our ears, and even our thoughts as an accurate representation of reality. But what I really dove into was what happened in the summer of 1947 on this Apache reservation. Robert Morningsky describes that his grandfather and 6 other friends, or it was a group of 6 Apache men, they were going out on their vision quest. And they were going out into the Four Corners region of New Mexico. And that night was a night that would forever change those 6 men and their perspective on reality. Because what happened was that they saw something in the sky, which we would call an aerial phenomenon. We might call it a UFO. We might call it an airship. They described it as a falling star. And at least in the Apache lore, that they had always been warned to not track these falling stars, because wherever they land, the military and soldiers would be there. And it's really interesting today to hear the testimonies of Jake Barger in using psionics to be able to drop aircraft and then retrieve the aircraft and potentially take that technology and use it for our own. So in the summer of 1947, we're really familiar with Socorro, New Mexico, which was a crash that has been investigated pretty extensively, as well as Roswell. They all happened in the month of June, at least as far as I can remember.
All right, and Linda Moulton Howe has the fragments to prove it too.
Absolutely. And Linda Moulton Howe, again, she, bless her heart, when I
What a
listen.
fucking trooper, man. Linda Moulton Howe's got to be like the most, like she's the David Bowie or like the Madonna of paranormal research. Like she's reinvented herself for decades. And
I personally love Linda Moulton Howe.
Man, from, like I was talking about the Art Bell show earlier, but from the work that she did on crop circles to cattle mutilations to chupacabra to ET to NHI to everything, and then all the way down to when Art Bell decides to get rid of the fragments from Roswell. Who does he give it to? Now she's touring it around on Ancient Aliens.
Absolutely.
Yeah, ridiculous. Yeah, it's like a championship belt, like a pro wrestler with a championship belt.
It really is. It really is. And Morning Sky talks about they didn't listen to their intuition, and they followed this they call a falling star. They tracked it.
Sure.
When they got to this location, they saw what we would describe as a modern day UFO. And from everything that I've learned from Robert Morning Sky, the way that their traditions and their tribe, they don't lie. And first of all, they don't share this information with outsiders. But Robert Morning Sky took it upon himself that he felt that this information was so goddamn important, excuse my French, that he felt it necessary to divulge tribal secrets to the world. And he made it his mission to basically describe what happened in that summer of 1947. So upon arrival of the wreckage, they find a crash ship. They begin to investigate the crash site. And from what I remember, there were several entities that they felt looked like little humans. They looked human-like, but they weren't human. Morning Sky describes reptilian-like features, but being very small in stature. One of the entities was still alive. It was badly injured and badly wounded. They decided to begin working on this entity, and they took it upon themselves to help him regain his health. As they began working on this entity, they heard the sounds of, at that time, I don't remember if it was the Air Force. I know it's 1947. The Air Force was just at that point being, I believe, assimilated. And anyways, they took it to be of the utmost importance to get the being out of there and into one of their little shelters that they had beyond the ridge. And anyways, they took this being who was completely silent and did not speak for the first month, did not say one word. And when the being regained his health, they heard him decipher the most amazing story they had ever heard. And when the being described his story, he pulled out this crystal. And this is, I know, really, really far-fetched. And it's really, gets into the, science fiction realms, but it's the truth from Robert Morning Sky's grandfather's account. That he began to describe a history of the human race and the planet Earth, unlike anything that we had ever heard. And Tim Kelly's description of galactic history seems to be the closest, and he's never heard of Robert Morning Sky.
That's so funny. Yeah, Tim is just like a wild card. He doesn't. There's so many things that I brought up that I thought were like, kind of entry level stuff, where he's just off in his own world.
Oh, absolutely. And he tested, as far as IQ. I would imagine Tim might be on the spectrum a bit. But I like to look at his work through an occult lens, and I can kind of better understand things. Because we don't agree on everything. I mean, sure. I haven't told him this, but we don't agree on everything. I just really value his personality. And I
like what he brings to the conversation.
Yeah, and you know what? I found the guys that have the least followers seem to be the most genuine. And even Robert Morning Sky's YouTube channel has like 16 people. He's been deleted, so he's had to make new channels over and over and over. But he's back trying to share this information again in his old age. But the story he describes is basically an advanced race from Sirius and an advanced race from Orion that began to move past their planet and their moons, and they began to colonize other worlds.
Sure.
From what I found in the material, they came upon an agreement that this area of the Milky Way galaxy was going to be Sirian and Orion, all of the resources that would be mined, all of the energy that would be drawn through loosh or however, all of the information systems would all be mined directly, similar to the way we do with the crown and bringing things back to either Rome, England, or Israel, that these resources are basically distributed, and they colonized the most beautiful world that they called Tiamat. Now, from what I understand, Tiamat was the crown jewel of both empires. It was pretty much a water world, and from everything that I found,
where is this information coming from?
this is coming from the Star Elder.
Okay.
And he is teaching it out of the crystal. He had a technology on the crash disk that allowed him to read this crystal, similar to the way that we put silicon chips into a computer.
Right.
And they said that this being really felt like a school child that was repeating what he had learned in school. And that they said that he was so excited to share this information with them. And he said that mankind had been occulted from this information, and that we were basically being essentially used as some sort of slave species currently. That wasn't always the case. They referred to not necessarily the being, but they referred to humans as beasts. Which I was appalled by it in the beginning. But I'm just repeating what Robert repeated. And essentially, he talks about this colonization of this solar system, and that at some point, the solar system here had become more advanced than what was in Orion and in Sirius.
Sure.
And that these two groups began to argue and fight over the rights of Earth, Tiamat, and humanity. And now Earth comes later in the story because originally Tiamat was just above Saturn in our solar system. So it was considered the most high, at least as far as the solar system. There was a war in which this group called the Anuna had taken over Tiamat and claimed it as their own. When the other group came back to retaliate, they brought weapons of mass destruction, that in this war, the planet was destroyed and knocked out of its orbit. And this is where the story gets really confusing, because there's not a lot of material, at least from Robert, that either Earth was Tiamat and it was dropped into its place today, where it began to kind of coalesce and it began to reform itself, or Earth was brought in from another solar system around Set and placed in the position it is in today. Mathematically, all of that lines up because of the, I think it's the Theobald law, and Jason and Tim Kelly both bring this up, that Earth is out of place. So during this war, essentially what happened was Earth was brought back to nothing, to nil, and it had to be recolonized, reseeded, repopulated. And they did this. And I guess we are at least what he described, we are the byproduct of that the Homo sapiens were originally on Tiamat. And anyways, he describes that this being had regained his health, that the being had taught the locals how to run these marathons with no water, with very little oxygen, and pretty much through the overcoming of the mind. That he taught them how to catch arrows. They taught them the ways of the plants. They taught them all kinds of stuff. And anyways, they kept it amongst themselves, that they would never share this story, because they were really worried about if the military found out, that the being and his people would be in jeopardy. But he does talk about how these beings had moved into the inner realms of the planet within cave systems that were being geomagnetically heated and cooled, and that they found a kind of an Eden within these dwellings. And he talks about that, you know, that essentially that this being looked human-like, and he was able to move back into the general populace. But he talks about how this planet was under the control of what we would know as Lucifer or Enki at one point, and that now he rules everything from the Apsu or the underworld, where the surface of the planet is being ruled by somebody known in mythology as Enlil, or the Satan, or the administrator of this Earth colony.
Sure.
And that the differences in, we've heard this throughout a lot of the work of many researchers, the scientists and the militarists, and these two different dynamics and these two different ways of thinking, and how they switch off the rule on the surface from one to another. They go back and forth. And anyways, a lot of the other information that is in the book is in his book, The Terra Papers, which describes this entire history and how basically our world today is essentially a forgotten paradise, and that the Earth was once the heart chakra of the Milky Way system, and that we've taken this fall from grace, and that humans had been essentially infected with this mind virus called the Wetiko, which has it makes us act selfishly. It makes us act in a manner that is against our spiritual principles that humanity had been basically programmed with. And so we're living two different dichotomies, essentially. But I guess that's the story in a nutshell. Robert's material, shortly after he published his work, his wife was murdered. He lost everything. He was laughed out of academia. He's got degrees. He's been the butt of so many jokes. And so he just said he would never, ever submit himself to that kind of humiliation, because he just didn't believe the current version of humanity was intelligent enough at the moment to be able to truly grasp the inner workings of our situation and our reality.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough ask because, like, what do you want people to do about it? Even no matter what you believe, like, what are folks supposed to do with that information? And I think most people have other shit going on in their lives too much of it to be worried about, like, things that ultimately don't change
Yeah.
their existence as they understand it. Um,
Yeah.
or some people would say, like, oh, those are the people living in the matrix, or, like, whatever, or there's sheep and there's shepherds, whatever metaphor you want to use. There's been a million over time. I don't know about all that, man. It just seems like once you have all that information, once you understand, okay, well, the world is because of all of these things. It sounds really no different than any other really kind of religious point of view to describe sort of the
Yeah.
same thing. Like, it sounds very much like this idea that, oh, they put a mind virus in us that makes us feel all these negative emotions. Like, how is that really any different than the myth of Pandora's box?
Oh, absolutely.
Or original sin, for that matter, if you want to take it from, like, a Judeo-Christian point of view.
Well, and Tyler, I do. I listen to a variety of scholars.
Yeah.
So I really like listening to Christian authors. Gary Wayne, when you get into some of these subjects, Gary Wayne's the only guy that's writing about him. He's a Christian author. And then, like, Derek Gilbert, L.A. Marzulli, there's a plethora of these guys that, basically, when I hear their message, what I think of, Tyler, is this is deceit. That basically Robert's story, he's telling the truth, but what is being manufactured is this connection to the underworld. That these beings have basically they come in and out of this dimension, and they feed us full of trickery, full of lies, full of deceit, full of, and Richard Doty's been his experience. I don't know if he's telling the truth nowadays, but Richard Doty basically says the one thing that you can guarantee from these entities is that they're not going to tell you the truth. So from the Christian aspect, I might look at it as that the circus was the Eden. And when we made contact with this underworld or this lower dimension, that it began to change our world. And Ishmael Perez, he's the only person I've heard say this. He's a fellow autistic researcher. And he says that all the pyramids, all the texts have been changed. And instead of Yahweh, they've been put into basically Enki is the good guy. And Enki is the benevolent one. And Enki is the one that's giving us all this technology. And that Enki is the person that has made our world. He's the Gnostic Jesus, essentially. And what he says is that couldn't be further from the truth. That basically that source creator, or at least our source, created us to live this spiritual existence and not to be in the books all the time, to live through experience, to do things rather than to be cooped up alone in a study room, studying from time immemorial, to just continue diving in the information. And when you translate the information into light and then light into Lucifer, you can kind of see this connection. And so I go back and forth between worlds. Like, I really think, though, at the end of the day, that Enlil and Enki are the same person. And in Anton Parks, in his decode, I found Anton Parks to be the most knowledgeable person, according to really knowing Akkadian, Sumero, the syllable.
You're listening to KEEP in the Keep. Please take a moment to tell at least one other person how much you enjoy the show. That's right. Grab that link and send it to that buddy you're thinking of who you know would be interested in what we're talking about right now. Maybe post it somewhere. I know it seems scary, but you can do it. I believe in you. Don't hesitate to leave a comment and a 5-star review, a like, wherever you're listening. And if you want, Patreon supporters for this show get episodes early, access to our secret Discord channel, chances to suggest questions to our guests, our games, and whatever else I can do for you. Every little bit helps. This podcast directly supports my ability to do what I love and take care of my growing family. The link is in the show notes. Thank you, bless you, stay in the keep.
And he doesn't claim to know it, but he claims to have some grasp on it. And he agrees that Enki, could be this benevolent force per se from this malevolent group. That again, Tyler, when I think of planet, I always think of plan, a plane, when, again, if you look up the Greek translation, it goes into wandering star.
Traveler, yeah.
Yeah, traveler. Absolutely. And what's funny is the nomads and the daemons, if you spell them backwards, there is this mirrored effect. Like I think Parks talks about how the priests would read things from right to left, but the general populace would read things from left to right. So it would be two different basically realities. And that's what I wanted to bring home was the classified nature of this research material. Tyler, I told you I started to form a thesis and a doctrine. And when I started to form the thesis and doctrine, that night, my daughter, she's like, "Dad, come outside, come outside." She's 3 years old. She barely speaks. And she says, Dad, outside, Michael. And I was like, "Baby, I got to go to bed. I'm tired. I worked 12 hours. And anyways, me and my fiance, we go outside and we look up in the sky, and sure as shit, an orb flies over the house. She points directly at it and she says, "That's Michael." And so, I'm thinking, well, man, I got to figure out, is she talking about Archangel Michael? Is this, like, man, this is the coincidence. And so the coincidence, these words, again, the words there is a synchromysticism because the words always get back to source meaning. So when you study these words, I hated English, but you get back to their root sources. And I was looking at Tim Kelly's cover, and she saw that picture of the little gray, and she said, "No, Daddy, no, no, what is that?" And I said, "Don't worry, baby, you have power over that. Don't worry about that." And then the next one was the Nordic, and she seemed to like the Nordic. But the reptilian, she seemed to be comfortable with him, but she said, "No, Michael has wings." And then I showed her the picture that Pierre Savac drew, that picture I sent you. And she said, "That is Michael, Dad. That is Michael." And so I was like, bingo, bango, bongo. We're on the right trail. So what I started doing in these last couple of weeks, within 3 days of that incident, she had meningitis, swelling in the back of her head. She claims that Michael is a protector. He's good. He's not bad. And so, she ended up healing through that experience. We used Tim Kelly's protocols on healing. I didn't go with academia on that one. I trusted Tim Kelly, and we healed up. And then I got sick and I got pneumonia. Both cars broke down in the same week. A brand new truck that I was driving at work, they said that it had electrical issues, Tyler. They go, "It's a brand new truck. What's going on? It's in the shop. It didn't work." My wife's phone at work, she goes, "It shut down the whole little network." And I'm not a tech guy, but they said that's the weirdest thing. And I just started having all these, basically what I felt like were demonic attacks. And then when I started listening to the Christian researchers, and I got into Nathaniel Gillis, man, it started making sense. Gillis says that he has seen brilliant geniuses get in, studying the Pleiadians, and end up dead within months. And so that's why I'm like, man, I'm really worried about the direction that I take the research, because I got a lot of precious material. I got a precious family. And honestly, I thought about calling this interview off. I thought about throwing it all away and just going back to, Christianity. But because I have such an issue with the historical context of Christianity, more specifically, the stories of Ralph Ellis, it's really difficult. And even the Gods of Eden has had such a tremendous impact on my outlook that I have a difficult time going in. And I'm sure you're in this boat, but I want to hear your piece, Tyler.
On Christianity?
Well, just on what I just said, really, on all that.
First of all, I just wanted to say, I don't think there's any reason why you can't be a Christian and then disagree with the historical context of any given church. I think from my perspective, Christianity is about what do you think about Jesus, right? And so do you think, and that could be divided into so many different sects of, the way that people view that. And I don't really think it matters. It's just if that's the center of your worldview, then you're probably a Christian, and that's fine. But I don't, I obviously I don't mind anybody's spiritual background. I want to talk to as many different people from different perspectives as humanly possible, because they all kind of unveil a different understanding in a different context about what Barry Fitzgerald would call the phenomena, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something like your kid, having an encounter with an angel, and identifying it as something close to, a Nordic or human appearance, but she says wings. I don't know what that really means other than to look at it symbolically. That's kind of how if something sounds like too good to be true or too crazy to be real, then I just my next instinct is to just okay, what do all these symbols mean? The same way that you dissect a dream, you know? So if someone comes to you and they I had this crazy dream. Okay, well, tell me about it. And they tell you about it, and maybe the narrative of the dream may not make any sense, but there will be these key details that stand out to you. And it's okay, well, what do these symbols mean? And maybe it's almost like doing tarot or geomancy with your mind, right? Or in this case, it's there's a word for divining dreams. I don't even remember what it was. Point being, you can always kind of find these symbolic patterns in sort of every narrative, every story. So going all the way back to something you said kind of way earlier, but about Robert Morning Sky having this, or telling this story about the encounter with these small beings that happened in the fallen star kind of situation. Maybe it was a crashed UFO. Doesn't really go into detail about that. Regardless, everywhere, and I do mean everywhere, that there are paranormal activities, there are these, what the ancient Germanic peoples, I guess maybe the Celts would have called the goblins or goblin, as Barry likes to say it, right? And those phenomena occur everywhere in the world where there's some sort of activity like this. And it's believed that they are these sort of gatekeepers between this dimension or this world and the next or something like that. Like that there are these sort of portals. People talk about Skinwalker Ranch, or they talk about Point Pleasant, West Virginia. There's a bunch of weird places over in like Eastern Europe. You want to talk about that kind of stuff, and all the way around the map. Even it's just this phenomena exists, but people use different words to describe it, right? Like they have. That's really what it comes down to. So like crossing them, like getting them all reported is difficult. But once you put them all together, yeah, it seems like everywhere that there's something crazy, weird, like metaphysical, paranormal stuff going on, these things seem to be there. And the question is, are these the aliens? Because there's so much conjecture, but like we never had one of these in a body bag, as far as we know, at least not publicly available for us to talk about, right? And it's the same thing with like other kind of cryptid sort of things, like Bigfoot or whatever. These beings that seem to exist liminally, right? But you'll never catch one. A unicorn, whatever. Right. But nevertheless, there's always something like that, and most of the time, it's literally talked about as like these little people, and they have these like they Tim sent me like a really cool video recently of like this guy in Ethiopia that had a carving that's exactly like the Hopkinsville goblin, you know.
Oh wow.
And it's so bizarre, and you see that all over the world. It's a little short dude, and it like they have like this little like big buggy eyes and like these pointy looking things coming off the sides of their heads, and maybe it's an ear or a headdress or a helmet that they're wearing or whatever. We don't know, but universally reported.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what Tim had found, was that there was this suppressed element of human history, and that he was really surprised. And when he started really diving into it, he got into the work of Wilhelm Reich and studying the ions, somatids, and this world that lies beneath what we can see. And so, Pierre Sabak, his work really, really has helped facilitate some of these experiences. He calls it the underlying scaphology of the phenomenon. And so I really like, what you talk about, potentially these gatekeepers between worlds. One of the things, like Wayne Herschel, he started using tracing boards, Masonic tracing boards, to study these ancient star maps. And he really, really got into it. And he went to some of the Masons, and they said, "Did you know this is what our whole secret society is founded upon?" And they essentially, during his first book, his co-author was murdered. Wayne spent the next 20 years trying to convey a message about a group of humans who traveled here from the Pleiades and had gotten stuck, and they couldn't leave. And so this is his entire message. When I got into the work of Michael Cremo, his co-author originally had died writing one of his first books, I think Forbidden Archaeology. When I got into the work of Harold Kutzwelle, beautiful German researcher, had gotten into, when he first went to edit his original draft for his first book, the person that edited that book died. The next editor did 2 weeks and said nothing to do with it. And so, gosh, I just see this time and time again. Even guys, I don't know if you're familiar with Nick Hinton, but he had done some really great work regarding Saturn and the connection between Saturn, our world, and Sirius.
I swear I saw something about exactly that topic very recently, but I couldn't tell you the name of the person involved.
Yeah, he basically he got rebaptized as a Christian, and he basically went out and moved out on a farm to wrangle cows. He just said, "Hey, I'm getting back to nature, getting back to the basics, getting back to what's important." Because really, as you know, Tyler, I mean, we can argue about this all day long, but it's all conjecture. But for me, during my experience with ayahuasca, I just really wanted to know, who am I? At my core, who am I, and where do I live? Where is my place in this thing? And I just felt there was a level of deceit. And I honestly don't know if the deceit is evil or nefarious, but that the deceit is there so that you look within and that you start to find different synchronicities and you begin to remember who and what you are.
Look, man, remember this. Never assign malice to that which can be explained by incompetence. So, like, the fact that there's knowledge to be known that the average person ain't getting their hands on because it's suppressed is because the people who are suppressing it have knowledge you don't have.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's really like I think it's a more healthy way to approach the world to just say, like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, because as soon as you know something that gives you power, some new knowledge, whatever it is that brings you power, there will come a point where there's someone you'd think it would be better if they didn't know that.
Absolutely.
And it starts off small. Like, the whole idea of a secret society, like, when you start off with, like, keeping secrets, the secrets at first are really arbitrary. Like, they don't really, like, honestly, if you told them to somebody, they wouldn't even understand what it fucking meant, right? And then, you know, over the reason for doing that is because when you get told a real fucking secret, you know how to keep a secret. And they know that you know how to keep a secret because they've let you practice with all these not really detrimental secrets. So by the time you're, but I'm assuming, right? By the time you're a 33rd degree co-mason or something like that, you probably know a lot of shit that you're not going to tell people, not because, you know, you you don't think that people are entitled to know things knowledge-wise, but that you're gonna wanna vet the people that you share that information with. It's the same way in classifications in the government, military, you name it. And you keep knowledge compartmentalized. So you organize things such that no one person really knows the whole picture. Everyone has a specialty, and everyone is sort of trading information only based on what they need to know. And it leads to a lot of questions about, like, who is at the top of both of those chains? Because there's there are people who know, most people know nothing, right? And I'm not saying that to put anyone down. I'm not even saying that from a position like I know anything. I just mean, like, honestly, most of us are not really, we have no fundamental grasp of what even are we, and they don't have the time to even consider questions
Oh, absolutely.
to, like, really sit down and have an existential crisis. It's like, I don't have time to have an existential crisis. I have mouths to feed. I have bills to pay. I have a job to go to. I have this and that. I'm trying to, just make it, just survive.
Yeah.
So once you have the leisure in your life to sit down and explore some of the conjecture about, hey man, what's really going on here? Honestly, yeah, it's overwhelming.
Well, and John F. Kennedy's speech that secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and that you know, gosh, we can see now. Ralph Ellis does a really good job of tracking how these secret societies and the Brotherhood of the Snake, more specifically, have essentially withheld and occulted this information, why they have kept the colony productive. They've kept us busy working. They've kept us busy stressing. They've kept us busy focusing on things that aren't important. And so in that, I guess, we were ever able to know who and what we were, that all of these systems would fail overnight, essentially. That, you know, because even I had to get really, really creative, Tyler. I could not sit around and research all day on a computer because I still have a beautiful family and a home that I have to pay for. And so I found a way to get a job and to basically listen why I work, and then take that information, to put that information in a database, and then go back to that information and have a plan to someday get myself out of this situation where I don't have to work so much, where I don't have to, stress so much about financial situations.
No, I
But
I totally get it, man. I can't tell you the number of hours, like, when I was young, especially, I was, like, 18, 19, 20. I worked as an electrician's apprentice, and all I did was just, like, listen to podcasts all day long while I, you know, did whatever I was gonna do construction-wise. But
yeah,
and your
yeah,
job's even less messy, at least, like,
yeah, no, absolutely,
yeah, so
absolutely.
and you could
So,
just, like, kinda relax, your bills are paid, and meanwhile, just download information, just, like you're in the Matrix or something, just plug it
absolutely,
in.
yeah,
I get it.
absolutely.
I can't tell you the number of books that I read while I was in the Air Force. Most of the time, the weather is actually kinda boring, but you still have to be there in case, right? So,
Yeah, no,
long
absolutely.
shifts, overnight when, just nothing's going on. I read a lot of books, man. I can't tell you the number of.
I can tell. And, I listened to your previous interviews and I'm like, Tyler I felt like you had a really good grasp of the material
Sure.
because, again, as this story unfolds, I mean, it continually gets stranger and weirder and more far out there. And so, I always try to bring back a level of reality. And so, Greg Carlwood's really big on finding a canon of material. Instead of having 3,000 authors that you study, choose the 10 authors that have had the most impact in your life. And you study those guys and you kind of frame your research around them, and openly, not like a Billy Carson, like, this is it, I'm not changing it up. But one guy that I really wanted to bring up, and I wanted to make sure that I shared this on the podcast. Have you researched Charles Fort very much?
No. No, tell me about him.
So Charles Fort, he was a researcher from the 1800s. Fort was just he would probably be diagnosed on the spectrum. He was fascinated. He started going through these old newspaper articles, and he went through all the archives in the library of his hometown, and he started finding all kinds of anomalous material that did not line up with the history and given in the 1800s. So he started making a list of all this material that he found, and then he started going through old books and old encyclopedias. But as he got older, he found that he had to support himself. So he was going to have to basically get a job, and he was going to have to go to work just like everybody else. He had an uncle that really, really believed in him. He believed in his passion and his work and what he was doing. He left him his small inheritance to live off for the rest of his life so that he could spend every day studying material. Charles Fort put that material together and he wrote a book called Book X, and then he wrote another book called Book Y. Both books he was not able to get published because the information within the books was so different from what anybody had ever heard that no publisher would put their name on. So Fort burns both of his first two books. Book X was about a sinister colony that was living in Antarctica and that basically was influencing humanity in a way that humanity was not able to see. His other book was, and this might be mixed up, Book Y was about an advanced Martian group that, after some sort of war, left Mars, came here discreetly, and colonized Earth and instituted the Babylon banking system, the fiat currency system. They ran things from basically from the either caverns of the planet or from this hidden space, because they were extremely advanced, at least their technology. Now, he claims that they were humans, at least the Mars group was, and that they had influence in a way that we couldn't even fathom. And Tyler, tell me if I'm wrong, but with the research of John Brandenburg and his plasma physicists, and the evidence pointing directly at an advanced colony on Mars, and then now we have every elite on the planet going down to Antarctica to begin to study, ice, in ice deposits. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, man, this work freaking blends really well when you've read The Gods of Eden with William Branley, where he basically talks about a group that creates 3 different religions or 5 different religions, and then basically goes to these groups and he basically convinces them of a doctrine that they get so deeply entangled in their subconscious mind that these groups fight amongst themselves over who's right until they destroy the planet. And these wars happen continuously. And what they do with the art of war is, first of all, they sell them weapons. And then when they're out of money, they give them loans. And then when they're out of loans, then they go back and they basically take everything from the group that they had given them. And I'm like, man, this sure seems like this could be either fill in the blank Zionist, Freemason, Rosicrucian, you name it, with the secret society. Even Jesus, when I go back to Jesus, was he a carpenter or was he a mason? Because it sure seems like he's a part of this brotherhood, at least in the work of Ralph Ellis, who, man, this guy spent 25 years studying the story of Jesus, King of Odessa, and his work. He says, kind of like me trying to find you, I couldn't get anybody to interview me because this material is so far out there, and I get it. But Ralph Ellis has a story to be told, and it needs to be at least heard. And his story talks about Jesus being literal, the king of Odessa, and he was a badass, and Jesus was mentally, physically, and spiritually different. And the man, was from what I understand, the group was experts in, near-death experiences, because they would put themselves in these near-death, that they would die before they died, using either snake venom, certain psychedelics, Amanita muscaria. They would enter these states, and they took this knowledge. He calls it the last of the Egyptian pharaohs. It was Yeshua.
If you look into some of the accounts, like of Romans opinions, people, just talking about what went on with this Jesus character guy at that time. One of the things that really sticks out is like none of them ever dismissed the idea that he had magical powers at all. None of them, like that was just like, okay. And like the thing that they would like ask was like, well, isn't he from Egypt? Didn't you guys say he would like came from Egypt? And they'd be like, yeah, well, they're all like magicians over there. So that makes sense. Is the way that they looked at it. They didn't think of that was like a bizarre account at all. They were just like, well, what do the Hebrews kind of want us to do about this? And like, how can we keep the peace? And of course, Pontius Pilate and all that stuff. But
when you get into the work of Derek Gilbert, who is a Christian researcher and one of my favorite, the man's just, I think really highly of his character. But he talks about in the River Jordan, when he was investigating, there's these ancient dolmens. I go, what is a dolmen? And I look it up. It's a portal, and then when you get into the work of Patrice Chaplin, and Greg Carl knows this material like the back of his hand. But let's just say hypothetically, what if something came through one of these portals, these dolmens, and it advanced human technology that help bridge dimensions. It's not that far out there. I mean, when you start looking at things in a way that, if you look at certain, like even the electric universe model, if you understand the electric universe model with astrotheology, with human psychology, and then you look at it through an occult lens, I think that's the phenomenon right there. At least you can better understand it.
I just think that the vast majority of people are not educated in all of those different subjects,
No, absolutely.
Why would they be?
No.
And a lot of the people who are experts in any of those subjects don't necessarily have any cross reference into the other ones. So, it's like a guy like Carl Jung, who was like an occultist and a psychologist and wrote about it, openly at that time, is unique. Like that's normal. But Freud knew all the same shit he did, but he was intent on keeping spirituality out of it because he wouldn't be taken seriously by the scientific community. And he knew that. So he fed everything on the whole, the sexuality model. And that's why we're still talking about him today. Of course, to some degree, there were some really useful insights, about
absolutely.
the human soul. People forget that psychology literally means the study of the human soul. Not just, we think about psychological as mental. We separate mentality from spirituality.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Really only like a 200-year-old concept at most that you would do that.
No, absolutely. And you know what? For me, I had to, and you're doing the same thing, Tyler. Like you said, you started off at one end of the spectrum and then you start drifting into other areas of study because you have to. But, for me, like mythology, history. Now I used to view history literally, but the more I got into the work of Jason Breshears in Archaics, now Tim did not like Jason Breshears. And I found Tim and Jason to be two of the best researchers in the world, and on two different spectrums. But Jason basically doesn't believe history is history. He thinks it's programming. He thinks that these public figures, celebrities, our media, all of our stuff is designed to throw us off so that we actually look within and we find ourselves through imagination, through intuition, through empathy, rather than trying to really use our intellect, that we really need to dive into these other ways of thinking. And I love that because, Nikola Tesla, he was a hero, growing up. I'm like, Tesla's famous quote was, at the end of his life, that he had spent all of his energy working for the betterment of humanity, only to be laughed at, mocked, ridiculed, and locked away in an apartment. I mean, it really does put a perspective in. So when I look at Robert Morningsky and I look up all his material, it says that Jordan Maxwell wrote the Terra Papers. I'm thinking, so, what if history is changed over time to fit a certain paradigm? And it is our, I guess, our path to rediscover truth. And so I always wonder because, force and form, they talk about Saturn, this malevolent entity, he's Satan and Saturn, and he's the lead archon. And I really think Saturn there is for force and form, that in the pressure, we either break or we get better. And Tyler, I wonder where humanity, because of where we are at, is this karma? Because when I watch humanity and I watch them, and not everybody, but a good portion, they're all fighting to talk. They all want to be the first person in the line. They all want to be heard. They all want to be the most popular. And there's this level of selfishness that I wonder if we brought this on ourselves. And that this is part of this karmic process of awakening. And that's a different perspective, but it really brings back, is this programming or is this history? Because, it seems to be a fine line.
Sure. Now, I like to think about it like there are software updates. I wasn't super aware of this until, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago. I got kind of dived down a rabbit hole. I wanted to learn about the Baha'i faith, because you don't really hear a lot about them. I think it was like the guy that played Dwight in The Office, right, is notably a Baha'i. I guess that's what they're called. And they believe basically that there have been tons of these like sort of messengers that are sent directly by God, from the beginning all the way through. So they go all the way back to Adam, and then all of the Hebrew uh oh my goodness, why am I spacing on this? Prophets, and then of course there's also Jesus, and then there's after that there's Muhammad, and there's also Hare Krishna and Zoroaster and everything in between. But like all of the sort of divine, the Buddha, they're all included, right? And they just see this as like periodically every like 2000-ish years or whatever, God sends another one of these really special people to guide us. And this guy, the Baha'i guy, was the last one, and there will be another one, down the line. And they just think that. And I find that so fascinating because it at least from their point of view, it's sort of like looking at the broad spectrum of everything instead of just like isolating it in like a regional or ethnic context. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
especially for a religion like that to come out of Iran too, is like also crazy. I think they were like put to death for even believing in some of this stuff. But yeah, they just not being Muslim.
Yeah, no, and there is one pattern that I found within like even if with Jesus, with Muhammad, with Buddha, was this connection with blue eyes for one, and the second one, the connection to the red hair.
Sure.
And the red hair, when we start looking at a lot of these old pyramids worldwide, we find that these pharaohs or leaders have red hair. And that seems to be one of the patterns that I have found. It was interesting. Dolores Cannon, she was a regressive hypnotherapist. And in one of her hypnotherapies, she recounted Jesus. And she said he had these bright blue eyes and that his hair was shining red and that he was absolutely majestic. That when he walked in the room, he was really quiet, really silent, but everybody gravitated towards him. And she talks about that on the cross, Josephus, who was a Roman soldier acting, I guess, he was basically the MI6 of antiquity. There was three people on the cross, and this lines up with Ralph Ellis, and that basically Jesus had basically taken a snake venom and was pronounced dead. Josephus, who was actually Joseph of Arimathea and was the fourth wealthiest person on the planet at the time, had let Jesus down from the cross, and they made their escape back originally to Great Britain, which was at the time the Guantanamo Bay of the Roman world. It was really hard to get to. And, and this is where the story gets a little confusing because they talk about him starting a church called The Way. It was outside. Jesus did not want churches to be indoors. He thought a service should be between one person and another. And supposedly he taught the way. He was showed the way from John the Baptist, and that Jesus basically had lived the rest of his life migrating to France and migrating to India, migrating all over the planet, and basically carrying this message. But the message later, again, like always, they talk about you say something great, be something great, and then see what they say about your name. So with Jesus, Jason Brashears thinks that it was a Greek stage play, that it was spiritualized. It was basically a physical representation of a spiritual story. I don't know what to believe at this point because there's so many differing opinions, theories. But what I do know is that when I see people living the Christian way and doing it the way not the way of show, but really truly living it. They're the nicest, kindest, most peaceful people I've ever met. And I see that in recovery. Carl Jung was instrumental in the development of the 12-step program because what they found was that if you don't change spiritually, you will never change. And that we are who we are. We can only either, adjust a little bit, but we can develop the spirit. In my study of languages, when I look at the soul and I study the solar plexus, you break it down, soul, lar, plexus. What is a plexus? It's a home. They talk about that our soul isn't from here, that our physical body is, but our soul isn't. And so when we get into the solar system, that just means to me a developmental system, because when we first develop a soul, we're not ready. We have to be developed. And then when you talk about what is the foci or the point of focus or our sun, it's called soul or Solaris. I'm like, you can't make this stuff up. It's all connected through language too.
Yeah, language is really tricky because you never know what's a coincidence, like just
Absolutely.
a homophone, an accident, versus what's like something that has a shared root that's been passed down over time. And there's a gazillion words like that, soul being one of them, and there's a lot of symbolic, architecture, like the actual physical representation of letters, whatever, that interface with that point of view as well, where it's like, okay, the first time that you notice that ami or ama and amigo and Amia and like Amelia and like all of the oh my gosh, it's because they all go back to friend in Latin. That's why. That's it. That's the end of the story pretty much. But then yeah, then there are these words that are like mom, like some version of making a O sound and putting your lips together and taking them apart, whether that's mom, mama, whatever, something like that. Universal throughout all language. And it's just because like why? It's like because it's the first sound that like all you have to do to make that sound is make a noise and move your mouth, right? And so all babies can do that. And that's why that word exists. But then you wonder about things like, okay, why are all of these different things that are seemingly unconnected? Why do they all share this linguistic root?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And what is the through line idea behind this that you're trying to describe? I understand what you mean.
Well, and I heard in your previous interviews, that connection, like how did we learn how to decode Sumerian? And so, I found this little article on Anton Parks because I really do. I think Anton Parks is the best in the world. Now he is French, so he doesn't have a lot of stuff in English, and it took a lot of time to be able for me to find and translate this stuff. But Anton Parks had a translator. His name was Gary Zeitlein. Gary Zeitlein was connected with NASA. He was connected, unfortunately, I found to intelligence, but he's just phenomenal, really sharp guy. He ended up dying shortly after he got connected with Anton Parks. Anton, he learned that the codification of languages was associated with the existence of castes within society. He had experienced certain visions about this reptilian race he calls the Gina Bull. It's it's the Sumerian word for lizards.
Right.
So by the end of the 1990s, Parks understood that the phonetic values of the Gina Abul were to be found in the Sumerian and Akkadian syllabaries. Parks found that there's actually a single Sumero-Assyro Babylonian syllabary on which all words or all principal words are based. And you can find these in the ancient languages of Arabic, Chinese, the Dogon, Egyptian, ancient Greek, Hebrew, Hindi, Hopi, Japanese, Latin, Germanic, and many more languages. He took the name Adam, which he believes, or which was supposed to come from the Hebrew term Adama, or clod of earth. So Parks,
which also means mankind, right?
yeah, and that's what he was unaware that the author had considered the Adam, which means beasts, animals, flocks, or levy, an establishment, installation, or colonization, all subsumed under inflict. And again, my background is not in language. I actually would run far, I was really interested in history. I was really interested in psychology, but, I found it necessary that I better learn etymology. And it really, if you look into Michael Tessarian, he breaks down a lot of different, the etymology of words. Chief Iron Bush, this guy is phenomenal. I wanted to throw out names so that anybody can listen to what I say and they can go back and they can cross-reference the information, because I try to be a moralist and I try to be honest as far as I know. And so what I did find was that there was this seeding of information, and that the seeding of information from this, I would say, spiritual plane, potentially, or a less dense plane, would seed information in here through ones and zeros, which we would know as binary code, through ACs and through ACTG, which is going to be our genetic code. And I think there's 3.3 different billion pairs of ACTG. So our genomes were also seeded potentially through this from the physical, or from the spiritual plane to the physical. And so I don't have you I'm sure you're familiar with the 1980 Rendlesham Forest incident at RAF Bentwaters Air Force Base.
Okay. I'm just gonna spout something off, and you tell me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So it's like two guys. I think it's a sergeant and an officer or an airman, are like on patrol, and they find a UFO in the woods. They try to approach it. Okay,
Absolutely.
same. Okay, they're American airmen. So
Yep, absolutely. And you know what? I found so much disinformation, planted information, psyops that were coming from what I call pharaohs, Pharisees, psyops, and propaganda coming from our rulers, or the GG, which is all misinformation. But what I did find were 4 specific incidences in our recent history that, again, there's too much evidence for me to believe anything in the contrary. This incident happened in 1980 on Christmas Eve, the night of Christmas Eve. The guy was a very brand new military police. His name was Jim Peniston. He's a Boy Scout, and I listened to his family speak. They said, "My dad doesn't lie. The guy doesn't lie." And I know that because, I'm that type of person. There was a time where I told fibs, but in my life today, I'm only sober and here today because of how honest and authentic I am. In 1980, this incident happened. Jim Peniston walked over to the craft. When he claims to have touched the craft, he said that lights came on.
And he saw these symbols, right? Like
spot on.
Yeah. Like these hieroglyphic looking symbols all over it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when he started studying, they were Sumerian.
Yeah.
And he that was the closest Sumerian Egyptian. That was the closest context that he could have. Anyways, Peniston, he didn't remember a lot from the incident, because you know how the Air Force, they diluted it by giving him all kinds of drugs. And by the end of it, he was going to hypnotherapist and he couldn't remember anything. And he started having these terrible dreams, and they didn't stop. And so what he did was, one night he woke up and he started writing down the binary code that was coming in. He didn't know what binary code was. He wrote down ones and zeros, ones and zeros. And later he took it to Linda Moulton Howe. And Linda says, hey, I know a guy that does binary code in the military. Let's see what this means. Anyways, he took it back and he said that, basically it was exploration of humanity for planetary advance, blah, blah, blah. But there was a threat from Orion directly and another threat from Zeta Reticuli, if I remember. And anyways, but the biggest thing was these specific points of latitude and longitude. And those points were like Lake Titicaca. One was basically the Bermuda Triangle, if I remember right. Sedona, Arizona was another. Stonehenge or Avebury was another. There was one in Germany where the Nuremberg trials were. There was another one in China where they found all the pyramids. I think there was another one in Pine Gap, Australia. And the most important one was right on the map where High Brazil would be, which is a mythical island of the Celtic Irish, of the Fomorians, believe it or not, right off the coast of Ireland. And when you get into the work of Helena Blavatsky, you know that the second root race, according to her, was the Hyperboreans. He said there was Brazil.
The giants from the north, Hyperborean.
Hyperborean,
like
absolutely,
like beyond north. Basically.
Well, that's what I thought too. But Peniston, when he was recounting his dreams, he said that he put High Brazil and Hyperborea together, that it was a large island, but that High Brazil was just the remnant. It was like an energetic signature that sailors would see every 7 years because it had been lost to basically the sands of time. And he was dead set that it was High Brazil, and these were the Hyperborean people. And so a lot of the media wouldn't even, like, from what I found, once he started talking about, they wouldn't touch him with the 10-foot pole. But he claims they're coming from 45,000 years in the future and then 52,000 years in the future, which is interesting because if you look at the Dan Burrish research, he claims that he was in contact with the P-42s and the P-52s, which would basically be traveling back. That's 42,000 or 42 light years, 42,000 light years beyond, or is how long it would take to travel there. So there is a direct connection. But what he found in his dreams were this connection with English, Enochian, the Sumerian language, and with definitely with the hieroglyphics. And so he didn't know. And so we're still just piecing this thing together. But these are really interesting references to later bring back. Because when I started studying the Pleiades and Orion specifically, it was the Messier 45 and the Messier 52 cloud nebulas. And the natives believe that when you left this physical world, that you would cross through this cloud nebula, and I believe it was Messier 52, and that you would be basically, that was where the judgment would happen. So that's why I always go back to, especially this connection with like John Dee and Edward Kelly, when they started channeling these Enochian entities, and it reminded them of the Serpent two-tone language and how it was directly connected to the Indo-European languages. And again, this is beyond my pay grade, but I want to at least send people in the right direction to start researching these things. And I bet we can really, when you have more than yourself researching and when you work as a team, it's like this exponential power. We can get so much more done. And that's why I hate, right now it seems like the researchers are fighting amongst themselves. We're right, you're wrong, you're pseudoscience, you're not, you're this, you're that. And I just want to say, hey, this is just all the music. It's the music And it's how we interpolate the music that makes us unique. And so I thought it was interesting because you talked in your previous episodes, Denmark and the tribe of Dan and this connection to Darren Kuyu and to Cappadocia and to Turkey and to the Aryans, and how this is basically playing into the world today. And I don't know how this stuff comes together, but when you were living in Denmark, did you see any of the, I guess, Aryan influence or any of these connections?
It's a really modern country for the most part, I mean, especially where I lived, because I lived in a place called Aalborg, which is a pretty modern city. But if you go to somewhere like, I don't know, Aarhus, or, some of the kind of more ancient cities there, even Copenhagen is a super, super modern city. It's been, obviously, Copenhagen has been a place for a long time, but it's, you know, like as modern as a city could possibly be. And it's damn near cyberpunk almost, and just like this kind of dreary, rainy wonderland in the north. Um, but I don't know, there are certain places where you go and you see like witches circles or like stone circles and things like that, where it's just like kind of built into the city's architecture almost. You do see that sort of thing, but there's nothing like really overt. You can go see like ancient Viking burial grounds and stuff like that. Uh, Largely, I'd say like most people are not really spiritual. Um, kind of kind of shy, nervous.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, I don't know. It's like I don't want to say it in like a negative way. It's just like really peaceful and absent. Like there's just not a lot going on.
No, absolutely. I know exactly. I mean,
Yeah,
um, Tim Kelly, really, I guess what I wanted to stress about his work, and him and Jason Breshears are the only ones that are talking about this. But if we go back to the Egyptian city of Heliopolis, which later becomes Memphis and On, the city of Anu.
sure.
Um,
Dan Odan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, when we look at this whole thing, everybody talks about the new world order. From what I found and from what Tim found separately and from what Jason found separately, that the new world order could go back to the new world order. So ANU world order, which happened 6,000 years ago with, I guess, I think the person at the movement was Akhenaten, and that we can kind of trace this evil back to that time period, and the essentially the destruction of humanity and the creation of a new humanity. That the dragon race worked with from what I understand, the Aryan race after a great reset to recolonize the entire world, and to do it without one's knowing. So, there's the book from Fritz Springmeier, which is How to Create a Perfect Mind Control Slave Without One Knowing. So they basically created slavery through thievery, through tithes, and through taxes. And that's what Tim talks about as the three big T's. And that essentially any knowledge of who we were previously has been forgotten, occulted, and you could be killed for even talking about it. And so, what I thought was really, really important today, and what is kind of the thesis of my work, is how cyclical cataclysm plays into our world today, and how it is tied into this binary quasar, which causes, initially, it causes pandemonium. It can cause weather changes. It can cause temperatures to spike. It can cause an increase in temperatures, emotionally and physically. You can see threats of war and talks about war, that during these time periods, there's this great adjustment that we begin to remember, and we come out of our own personal dark ages and we remember who and what we are, and we start taking our power back gradually. And that is the apocalypse, this revealing from the veil what has been hidden, and that it is cyclical. And for me, I really want to stress the connection to this dark star and to the leaders of the world, more specifically the Jesuits, the Zionists, and the Fourth Reich, which this Nazi group that seems to not only have survived World War II, but has been basically in an incubator waiting for this time of reset, waiting for its time to pounce on its victims. And I really do. I'm seeing the breakdown in all of our systems. I don't know how many people that I've talked to that are working and still can't pay their bills. And when they call to get help, they're put to an automatic machine, and there's no human. One thing since 2020, we've lost our sense of community without even knowing it. That we're all disconnected houseplates now. That we used to be a big forest with these networks that are now being gradually disconnected, and that we are truly the technology, that we are an organic technology that has not only been designed, but created, planted here for a reason, and that we are a fractal of the Godhead experiencing itself here, and that there has been, and again, I don't know if the nefarious force is, I know that in Worlds in Collision, that they talk about this force being Venus, that Venus is Lucifer, that Venus comes here,
The morning star.
the morning star, and I connect Jesus to the morning star. But if you look at the work of a lot of good researchers like Mark Amaro, they talk about this advanced Venusian culture that is definitely directly connected to serpents, definitely connected to yoga, to Gnosticism, and, in the Billy Meyer material. Now, this is another big part of my argument, because Billy Meyer is another person that I have found that his story through and through adds up. And Billy Meyer talks about that when he was visited by Simjaza, he was given a tour of the solar system, but that Mars and Venus were off limits. They said that there is life on Venus, but it's not like life here. It's not natural, not organic. And so that connects me back to all these researchers in this black goo. Now, this sounds far out there, but there was a war that was fought in the Falkland Islands, and you can find tons of information on it.
There were a lot of Nepali soldiers involved in this too, for some reason.
Yeah, no.
It's very weird. We're like one of the weirdest war, like kind of covert war stories of all time, because it doesn't really get talked about except in like sort of conspiracy theory kind of circles. Yeah.
No, you're spot on, Tyler. You're leading me right to where I want to go, because, there is a direct connection between the areas of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and this Aryan connection that I haven't been able to figure out. And I've been, Jason Brashears talks about it, that Apollo is, and the Hurrian Aryan Empire began to work for the dragon. And I'm like, if you don't know any of this stuff, who's the dragon? I know Michael slays the dragon in the cosmic war, at least according to scripture. So what I found the dragon to be was these reptilian, they're called Homo saurians, believe it or not. And they were here before we were, at least according to what I found. And when humans arrived from the Pleiades, they forced this group into the pockets, into the cave systems, into the inner earth, where they basically adapted really well. And they kind of went dormant, similar to the way the Nazis did. And in their dormancy, the life on Earth, some of the people were able to connect with this group in Tibet, in modern day China, in modern day Ukraine. And they made connections with this group, and there's proof. And Harold Kutz-Vella, German researcher, He says that this group merged with the reptilians because they could, that was the only way that they could merge with tech later on. That humans, that the secret of the owl is that these humans at some point in our history, they merged with tech and their bodies stopped degrading and their spirits or souls were placed in these bodies and they lived forever and they were able to garner an incredible wealth, power, and dominance over this plane of existence. And that they did it by merging with this reptilian group that lives in the caves. And this all comes now. This is really, I would say, the backbone of my research because
Is there any like fossil evidence of this Homo saurian?
Absolutely.
Okay, I want to dive into that. I want to take a quick break because we've been talking. Like it feels like not that long, but we've been talking for a long time. So yeah, let's take a little break here, and then we'll jump in down that afterwards.
Thanks, Tyler. I appreciate you, buddy.
Cool.
When we start looking for evidence, whether that be extraterrestrial, when we start looking for evidence of this reptilian influence in our daily affairs, when we start looking for anything regarding like metamaterials, Linda Moulton Howe, there's not going to be a lot found. And that's because most of this material has been taken to private museums, ran and owned by the controllers of the world, which I believe are the Zionists, the 13 bloodlines of Europe, and Mossad. I think that this Fourth Reich is set up right in line with all these groups. And I think that most of the material that we would look for as evidence has been occulted. But an interesting reference goes back to Camille Souvet. She shared her research on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast with Mark Steves, and she found directly in Peru a connection to the bones of essentially the skeletal remains that she was given to her came from grave robbers. And I know grave robbers are not going to be the most trustworthy people, but right now this is all we got. And it points directly at the Nazca lines in Peru. And the genetic evidence points directly at a reptoid mixed with some sort of humanoid and a bonobo. And also there was unknown DNA that was not recognized. And I really, again, Tyler, I wish I had more evidence to point you in this direction, but if we look at the mythology that we've been given, we can see that the reptile is an integral part of our mythology, and it is a crucial part in understanding our history. And so, jumping to that, Pierre Sabak has studied language extensively, and what he did find as evidence was what he calls as the artifact. And in the artifact is a code that seems to point directly to Orion and to Sirius as being a big part of either the recreation of our world and the reseeding of what we know as life, or they are the ones that gave us the ability to think cognitively and the evolution of the prefrontal cortex. But in the research of Anton Parks, there is a direct connection to Sumer, to the areas of Sri Lanka and Egypt, and to this reptile worship. So I just kind of want to see where you want to take it from there.
I'm actually curious because of a lot of what you just brought up, especially Orion. You said you'd listen to my recent talk with Dr. Bruce Solheim.
Absolutely.
What did you think of his story and of Anzar himself?
100% credible. 100% credible. I mean, I found Bruce as a person, not that I don't think he would. I'm sure he has told lies, but he does not seem like a liar, and I think he is being 100% authentic and truthful. I think the only points I would have to worry about is it does seem like we have the technology to seed ideas and thoughts into the mind. I think they call it the mind of God technology. So I would be a little concerned potentially, but I'm not really with Bruce because there's just so much evidence to the contrary that, like we had talked about, these other worlds seem to seed information in, whether that be through near-death experiences, whether that be through the use of psychedelics, whether that be through the use of meditation, whether that be through the use of autists that seem to be on the spectrum, that seem to be picking up some sort of signal that others are not picking up on. I think that all of the prophets throughout the Bible had information that was seeded to them through the higher worlds. I know in my own experience, Tyler, I continually would seek out connection to these worlds, and I would always ask for this benevolent relationship. Because of my, again, I've always just been a kind, gentle, loving person. That's who I am at my core. It's who I'll always be. And so it seems like very gentle, kind, loving beings have been seeding information to me. And the message to me was first, get with Tim Kelly because this is going to be your mentor. And I know this sounds far-fetched, but that's just how I felt. And so that, I mean, cross that off the list. And then the secondly was connecting specifically with you, Tyler, to get some of these ideas out there.
One of the things about the whole, I guess, adventure that you're on is that you're deliberately trying to get a lot of people, a lot of thinkers together, and so sort of this think tank of yours, this, I don't know what you're calling it. Is it Psychics Angelic Symphony?
Yeah.
But so it's you got yourself, you got Tim. You also you've mentioned a lot of these people, but Nathaniel Gillis. It's really weird serendipity. Speaking of that, Barry Fitzgerald, like in the podcast that I had with him, mentioned specifically, he's like, you need to get in touch with Nathaniel Gillis, like, and he's kind of in the area, so to speak, on the East Coast, I think, or somewhere in Appalachia. And then I actually did email Nathaniel Gillis, or like went through his website, I think, and sent, the message through there to invite him onto the show. Didn't hear anything back. And then that was like one of the first things that you brought up when you were kind of explaining your whole idea to me in our email chain was like, you listed off all these people, like, holy shit, like this guy knows that same dude. Maybe that's the, through line to get to that point. And then there was also just the, Robert Morning Sky getting brought up. A lot of these things are like weird. It's so strange how you connect with someone else, like what?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? Again, like the coincidence, it's just where these words and these phrases, even so, I guess, Phoenix, let's take the city of Phoenix. This is where Tim's from. It's on the 33rd degree parallel. The name Phoenix, when you start researching guys like Jason Brashears, he basically points directly at this being the biggest cover up in the conspiracy community is the knowledge regarding this Phoenix weapon. And a weapon because whoever created us, and this is Jason's belief, not mine, that after we were created, that we were deemed so dangerous and so potentially disruptive that this was the only way that they could keep humanity, I guess, from ascending to the same level as their creators. And so, what I found was this codification of language, this classification. Whenever they say, oh, Linda Moulton Howe, the material is classified. That's not classified per se in the way you think. Nowadays, I'm finding out that the class is for these very strict caste systems. And NASA, the word NASA, I know everybody says translates it to deceive, or in Babylonian, it's to ascend. But really, from what I understood it to be, was it is the high class. And the high class has always been able to have space flight or interdimensional technologies per se, but the lower class will never be given any of those technologies until we fight for it and we earn it back. And the message of Albert Pike, he basically says that 1% of the world rule because we allow it. That if we take our power back and if we come together, then nothing can stop us. And I've taken that message and ran with it. Tyler, I don't know how your financial situation is, but I know that Nikola Tesla died in his apartment with nothing. And when he died, the John Trumps of the world and MIT scientists were pouncing on him like black vultures in the freaking heat. And so I think, this is my personal opinion, the best technology that the world has ever seen was last saw by the eyes of John Trump when he went into Tesla's apartment upon his death. But when I see guys like Tim Kelly, I mean, everybody in the world, in my opinion, should have his book, Self-Empowerment and Healing, because again, my daughter had meningitis. She was, it was Tim's protocols that I went to when I was really sick. Tim's, again, his theories, I would think that every family should have that in case of emergency. But more than that, Tyler, what I found is guys, the best researchers are usually broke. They have no friends. They have no followers, not all of them, but they have a hard time understanding the model of capitalization. They are very much givers. They're very much people that want nothing. They don't want any fame. They don't want Anton Parks just wants to be left alone. He's a shy French guy. He doesn't want any of this. Pierre Sabac is the same way. If they found it necessary for the survival of the human species, for your children and my children, that if we do not address these glaring levels of malevolence that have been around since Sumer, that our world will continue to be shattered, and the hopes and dreams of the best mind and the best thinkers will be put in the cellar. And so what I wanted to do was, with my platform, I wanted to take all the money that I received, but not all of it. I was going to split it 50-50 and give it to the researchers. And then we'll take what we need. I don't need to be rich. I wanted them to be rewarded for their work. And guys like Graham Hancock, I know he steals people's work. I do. It's out. Stephen Greer, what they do is they go around, they find little guys like you and me. They take their information and they never share where they got it. They say, "Oh, I got this." And so that ego is really what keeps us from the spirit of being in the loving spirit of what I would call consciousness. And I would like to advocate for guys like, you and I, and guys like Pierre Sabac and Anton Parks and Jason Brashears and Greg Carlwood and many more. I want to advocate for these guys. And I would hope to see that we can someday come together. We can create something better than Google. We can create something better than YouTube, because when you search information, they're hiding it, because like you said, Tim posts a link and then 3 months it's gone. So when I'll have to check BitChute. I've got to check Rumble, even for the Robert Morningstar material. You can't find it. Luckily, I have all the stuff, and it's been saved in these secret files on YouTube. But I would imagine if after some sort of great reset, all of our work could be forgotten.
That's why I'm saying, like, somebody like Tim, whose book's only available in PDF, like, you need to carbon copies of that shit, and you need to send it out to different places so that that's the whole point of reproducing things is so that they last the test of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Find new ways to spread the whatever information it is that he wants to spread out. And I'm, for me, mostly interested in like the history stuff. Like that's so fascinating. I could go down rabbit holes forever about just like all the different potential takes on all that stuff. But it is nonetheless really, really fascinating and entertaining. Even like it's fun to discuss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, as far as like right now, I guess they're talking about David Grush and I would say the UAPs are in the news, but when you've studied this over a course like Carla Turner and guys like Wendell Stevens and the early comers like Billy Meyer, it seems like we're trying to pull the wool out from underneath the new researchers that don't know how to look across time space. And
most of the people, like young people who are looking into this stuff, are not traditionally initiated. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So like you have a lot of people out there who have a lot of access to a lot of knowledge and a lot of like conjecture. You know, a lot of people who are like making content, making videos, like educating, teaching on subjects.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're not part of any sort of like actual institution, so to speak, such that they've like acquired all of this. And that, I think that's very frustrating for a lot of people, but it's also problematic in that they don't necessarily know what they're getting themselves into in a lot of cases. Here's a fun one for you. This will be your homework between now and the next time we talk. Get a hold of this book, The Secret Cipher of the UFOnauts. It's by Alan Greenfield. And just read that and tell me what you think of it.
I really like Alan Greenfield. I like his work.
Have you read that book?
I haven't read the book.
Yeah, you need to. Yeah, definitely grab a copy and a coffee. Tell me what you think of that thing, because it's so fascinating. You were talking earlier about like the encodification of languages, even across languages and everything, and that's exactly what it's about. It's for so long, things, names of things that are channeled, oftentimes fit into this. And he points out like there's this page in the Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law. I think it's like the 93rd page or something. I don't know. Somebody type it in the show notes if you remember. But there's a line just arbitrarily drawn across the page. And it is like a code that it took them still another like 50 years to actually decode. But it's a cipher, right? And then once you understand that, basically the practice that's brought up, and this is just part of it. One of the practices that he experiments with is just like, okay, if I take a name or information given to me by a channeled entity like Anzar the progenitor or like whatever, and filter it through this cipher, the numerical value only occurs so many times inside of the book of the law, right? Which was itself a channeled book. This is probably channeling something that he's talking to, Lamb or whatever, Horus. I don't know. Point being, but once you understand that cipher, you can really like start to draw lines between a lot of these cases, and a big one is like Indrid Cold, from the Mothman case, right? This very, very famous, strange name, like why, and then you put it through there, and it like gives you all this sort of like insight, but it's very confusing. Like you have to really kind of like take your time with it to understand it. But that is something I would really like your perspective on. Like, what do you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would love to do that for you. And Tyler, really wanted that. Have you investigated anything to do with the 1996 crash in Virginia, Brazil?
I was I just had a Brazilian person at my house recently for the 4th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Well, so she was like dating my friend who had driven out to visit for the 4th of July. We did like a barbecue and all that stuff. And we were asking her about it, and she says it's complete nonsense. She's like, it's nonsense.
Gosh, well,
and every person that I've ever talked to who was Brazilian, it's like, yeah, no one believes that shit. The same thing, we hear these rumors about like, Mexico City's like constantly sees UFOs, and anyone who actually lives in Mexico is like, that's bullshit. Like that's
Yeah. Well, you know what? And sometimes though, it's really tough to ask people from certain areas. Cause like even yesterday I was at a Chinese restaurant and I'm like, oh my gosh, what about the pyramids in China? And she was like, there is no pyramids in China.
or the Bosnian pyramid.
Absolutely.
It's
No,
bullshit. It's complete total horseshit. It's not a fucking pyramid.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, so, it's really difficult because there's been so many earth changes.
Right.
When we start talking these levels of time, even like Sitchin 432,000 years ago, these are really, really difficult to conceive of.
But the legend of the Bosnian pyramid was like a deliberate hoax. Like it was an American man who had like citizenship there who started this as a tourist attraction. Like that's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? In this field, you find out there are so many gimmicks. There are so many,
I know.
I would say, planted stories that it's really difficult to navigate.
That's why you got to be careful. That's why like you start to believe everything that you hear and you end up sounding like Billy Carson.
Yeah, no,
say something like
I
it's
always
the truth and you don't really know what you're talking about.
I go back to the source. I watched a documentary though with it's James Fox, and it was Moment of Contact, and he goes so in at least this is his story, and this guy that was there in 1996, he was driving home late at night. Boom, something similar to the way Robert Morningsky describes a falling star. Something crashes. He makes the decision to follow the crash. He essentially watches everything. He watches everything unfold. He watches the military pull up. And in a matter of several days, they closed off every entrance. They closed off every area so that nobody would know about that situation. And again, there's just too much evidence, at least from this point, from this perspective. There was two Brazilian Air Force guards that had claimed that upon arrival, there was one entity, and they claimed that it smelled like terrible sulfur. That it was just the most god awful smell. And anyways, one of the airmen pick up this beam. He carries them to the hospital, and they know where the hospital's at. They've actually investigated the doctor that worked on him, and he did confirm. And the other airman would never speak the rest of his life. He wouldn't speak. And so anyways, his story was the guy that carried him died right there in the Virginia Regional Hospital. And that the being, they tried to work on him. The doctor would never comment on the story, but when the doctor died, he wrote a book and he claimed that during that situation, he did not want to divulge anything because he didn't want to lose his career. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want to be labeled as a conspiracy theorist. But he said the being made direct eye contact with him. And he said, I feel so sorry for you humans, for you have no idea who and what you truly are. And you have no idea what your potential really is. And I always go back to that.
This has been the theme of our whole conversation.
Absolutely. That falls apart.
Think about like how much conjecture and the lore of the paranormal, occult, UFO, ancient astronaut, everything, all of that stuff hinges on something like Admiral Byrd's diary, which is 100% not
real. That one's proven.
And yet there's so like once that fell into the zeitgeist, right? Like that story, even though it's been debunked afterwards, right? It already had a life of its own. And like there are other things that stem from details,
Oh, absolutely.
that people believe and follow and are seriously considering. And some of those might be like happy accidents, like, oh, there really is something there. But the majority of this stuff is it has to be thrown out.
And it's not, there was only a few anomalies that I found. And it was the 1994 aerial school phenomenon. I don't know if you've seen that one, but the one in Rua, Zimbabwe.
The kids draw the same figures and everything.
Absolutely. Well,
they actually did there's an X-Files episode where they like do a kind of version of this, but it's in America.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, and so the story gets interesting now because those kids started dying later on.
Yeah.
Each one of them. There was another one that died recently. But the thing I wanted to point out about this, and this is why I think the phenomenon is directly connected to the underworld, because there's a guy named Archivist, and he goes by Analog Bin Bin, but he basically went through all these newspaper clippings and he started to find anomalies again. And he found one in Africa in that same area where there was a incident at a lake. And I think the town was Ariel. The name was Ariel. And there was two boys that showed up to the lake. One jumps in, goes swimming. The little boy watches him swim. And then all of a sudden, the boy reports that there's this black mermaid, a mermaid. And he was very specific about the description. And that this merman was pulling the boy under violently and teasing him, toying with him for a good time. The boy ran back to his mom and dad and he says, "You got to help." He said, "Our friend's in trouble. He's dying. He's drowned. He's in the lake." And the parents come back and the boy's laying on the shoreline, completely unharmed. And so as they began walking up to the boy, this entity, whatever it is, again, we can only speculate, pulls him back in and drags him to his death and he dies. And that's right there in that same area. And it was known as Ariel. And then you connect that back to the Little Mermaid. If you go back to the original name for Jerusalem, it was Eurus Salem or Ariel Salem.
Salam.
Yeah, Salam. And so,
Shalom.
the Salem witch trials, when we get back over there.
Well, it means peace.
Okay.
So like shalom is peace. The Arabic equivalent is salam.
Okay.
There's also there's some conjecture. I don't really know how serious it is, but that there was at some point a god called some version of that word in that area, and that's why the city is named that. But yeah, it's not like it's not like a Hebrew word in and of itself, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess just to kind of summarize everything, I'm trying to stay away from forming any sort of concrete beliefs, but I do think that the picture is becoming increasingly more clear as we approach this return of this dark star, that we're remembering this process of forgetting. And I do think that guys like Pierre Sabak, when you get into the Nephi and the Nephilim, and that's the etymology's word connection to Orion, and then to the Seraphim and their connection back to Sirius. And then in just about every culture worldwide talks about us coming over from the Pleiades in this dream time to enter this great Maya, this great maze of illusion, that we come here and we try to navigate through this the best that we can. But I really like Jason Brashears because he says the way that the dates are set up, that the Earth was almost completely destroyed in 2239 BC. And then in 1687 BC was the Ogygian deluge, and the world was destroyed unlike we had ever seen before. There was another great restart. And then that these cyclical cataclysms happen all the time. And this is a big, I would say, part that the UFO phenomenon might be forgetting. Because Charles Ford, again, and I don't think we were recording on this, but his final thesis, after researching day in and day out for the entirety of his life, he says, that he thinks Earth was no man's land, that people came and explored and they fought over the right for the possession of us and Earth. And, I just don't underestimate this connection between our polar areas of our planet and this probably potential, I would say, inner realm that does affect what happens on surface, and that these, I would say, influences act like gatekeepers or as culture bearers to continue on the coding. And so Billy Meyer, again, that's the one that everybody throws it out. One point that I want to make is that Billy Meyer, was investigated by the great Wendell Stevens. Wendell Stevens believed this man wouldn't tell a lie, but I did find Billy Meyer connected to some dark secret societies like Knights of Malta. And this is something that I want to bring up with Nathaniel Gillis, is that when you get into the 33rd degree of the Freemason Lodge, from what I understand, is when you graduate, you go into the Pleiadian rank. So what in the heck is the Pleiades, which is supposed to be this loving, at least in the alternative community, they're kind of like, oh, these loving Pleiadians came here to give us love, light, and teach us how to live. But Tyler, what I want to leave the audience with is I think it might be more of the latter. If anybody has seen the TV show V, or the V, which is basically how these beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed, advanced people come here with all these promises, with endless life and basically never aging and perfect societies. And when they peel off the skin, the outer layer, they're actually essentially not human. And that, I guess, would be my thesis, that something about this phenomenon is so dark and so evil and so nefarious that any of these great minds get deep enough into this research, if they do not have some sort of networking or connections, or if they are not diligent about what they do, they might end up dead or their family might get hurt. And so that is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to speak to you today, because I got a beautiful group that I'm the leader of and I'm trying to protect. And man, I really think that we're going to figure this thing out together. And I do think that it's not going to be pretty. I think in the next few years, we're going to have threats of war. We're going to have wars. We're going to have probably issues with finding clean drinking water. My fiance and I are devoted to learning how to drill wells and dig for primary water sources. We feel like that's going to be really beneficial in the future. But I do think that coming up, we are going to experience systems failures. I think we're going to see the collapse of the American dollar. I think we're going to see new religions being presented. And I do think there's going to be this revival of the Christian Reich. And like the gods of Eden, I hope that we can learn, but it sure does seem like one group is creating religions, dividing people, selling wars, creating wars, going to both sides and playing this middle force. You always think about it. Who never goes to war? Switzerland. Let's see, Belgium. What's in Switzerland? We got CERN. Is CERN a time? Is it a time traveling machine? What are we doing in CERN? Why are we not involved? So I think that it is going to be absolutely crucial for us to find platforms that we can freely share information on outside of Google and YouTube. And like our past, when the name of Amazon, the reading app, is Kindle, does that just make sense? Because, we've had these massive book burnings throughout history. I would imagine one's coming. And what I do fear is that they're going to say, it's a different world, release all the information, let's get the secrets. And I do worry that they are going to flip the switch. Government is going to come in and say, these are conspiracy theorists, they're psychiatric patients, and they're all crazy and they need to be locked away. And they will build that momentum to basically, because in history, I did find these orphan trains and these large asylums that are parked all over North America, specifically the area of Kentucky that we were talking about and near Mammoth Cave. But I do think these are going to be some of the issues that we are going to face in the near future. And like Dean Henderson says, it's not the people's fault. It's the systems that have beat us down to the point we can't think, I believe my damage through autism could be definitely related, probably through diet, probably through vaccination, probably through clean air. Maybe some of it is it's just part of this, developing people to connect with this other realm. But it sure does look nefarious, because when I get into the work of like even Donald Trump and some of our leaders worldwide, the connections to Epstein, the connections to Masonry, the connections to the Rosicrucians, the Rose Cross, the Red Cross, Aries, Mars. These are all boom, bang, and it's not a slam dunk, but they're kind of pointing us in directions to say, again, let's not make the mistakes that we made in the past, and let's come together and do something different.
Okay, man. We might have to do a part 2 or something, but let's wrap it up for today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, really cool. Good stuff. Thank you for coming on the show, too. Man, what a show. Make sure you go and check out his podcast and his website and everything. I'm hopefully going to have the stuff in the show notes by the time this comes out. We'll see in our email chain between us. Yeah, but thank you for being an awesome listener, checking this stuff out. We'd love to hear from you. You can leave reviews on whatever your listening platform of choice is. 5-star reviews, hopefully. Comments, saying nice things, or whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. Well, it does. I don't know. I love you. God love you. Till next time, stay in the keep.
Hi, I'm Ben, host of the Field and Foley podcast. Every episode I sit down with incredible guests, not just sound designers, field recorders or musicians, but experts in everything about audio. We explore the creative process behind the sounds that shape our favorite games, films and experiences. Whether you're an audio professional or just someone who loves great sound, Field and Foley offers deep dives, behind-the-scenes stories and insights you won't hear anywhere else.